and working conditions at Cal Cartage. The firings are expected April 30th at the warehouse serving the Port of Los Angeles. Hundreds of workers are facing the mass retaliation for trying to organize and use their labor rights. The Warehouse Workers Resource Center says this is unacceptable, and they believe it's illegal. An online petition has been launched telling the Port of Los Angeles that the firings are unjust and demanding that Cal Cartage retain all the workers who are facing termination. About 80 Independent Pilots Association UPS pilots are honoring picket lines in Cologne, Germany for a 24-hour strike of German UPS workers. IPA spokesman Brian Godet.
Anytime there's a legal picket line against UPS and we're in a position to support that other union, we choose to. Cologne is our largest hub in Germany, and the German workers there are fantastic and do a great job of taking care of our pilots. And if they felt they needed to take a day-long strike against UPS, we're not going to cross those lines. We're going to honor those lines.
Godet says about 60 UPS flights will be affected. Ford Motor Company says it will invest $1.6 billion in production plants in Livonia, Michigan, and in Ohio. The investments were in the 4-year contract reached last year with the United Auto Workers. Ford committed to investing $9 billion in the U.S. over the life of the contract as part of the union's collective bargaining effort. UAW Vice President Jimmy Settles says he's thrilled that the UAW was able to secure these investment commitments in the collective bargaining contract. Ford's $9 billion in U.S. investments over 4 years will create an estimated 8,500 American jobs. On International Workers' Day, May 1st, members of the International Longshore and Warehouse Union, Local 10 in San Francisco, will be calling for a national day of mourning for black and brown unarmed victims of police killings. The ILWU was established after the West Coast waterfront strike in 1934, where maritime workers faced police violence. Derek H. Mohammed is Local 10 Secretary-Treasurer.
Police brutality is a big issue that mostly communities of color have had to deal with historically. The current situation with the police brutality in America, there has certainly been an increase. And since we are a union that has historically sided with the marginalized, the underprivileged, we felt it necessary to raise our voices in opposition to what's going on as it relates to police brutality and terror.
Workers Independent News is brought to you with support from union-owned and represented Bank of Labor, member FDIC, equal opportunity lender. Bank of Labor has earned the reputation as a leader in union business lending by understanding the needs of labor unions. Online at bankoflabor.com.
You've been listening to WIN, Workers Independent News. For more information, visit laborradio.org.
It's time for the Rick Smith Show.
I want you to get up now. I want all of you to get up out of your chairs. I want you to get up right now and go to the window, open it, and stick your head out and yell, I'm as mad as hell, and I'm not going to take this anymore!
I don't want to abolish government. I simply want to reduce it to the size where I could drag it into the bathroom and drown in the bathtub.
You bet I cut the taxes at the top.
How dare you? How dare you? Go ahead, make my day.
The Rick Smith Show starts now.
Welcome, brothers, sisters, working class heroes. This is the Rick Smith Show. Thanks for being here today on the big program. Lots to get to, lots to talk about as the first day of the general election hath begun. It is what it is. Last night, a total sweep for Trump and a mostly total sweep for Hillary. It looks like we now know who the November candidates are going to be. It's going to be the T-Rump and Hillary, and the fun. This is going to be, it's going to be muddy. It's going to get dirty. It's going to get nasty. It's going to be down in the primordial ooze of politics, and maybe we need this. maybe this election cycle is the cleansing that our political system needs. It needs to get horrible and nasty and just kind of mud wrestling for a while to where maybe we turn away from it, or maybe it just goes completely the other way and it just becomes the WWE. It becomes wrestling, and it really is fake, and it really is scripted, and it really is, well, just the worst in all of us. Maybe that's what it's going to be. But I got to be honest, sitting in this chair, the fun will be they're never going to be at a loss for content. The sad reality is, as a citizen of this country, that's a whole nother moment. But last night, the frame that you will hear, and you will hear it again and again, is going to be the Sanders frame of Hillary Clinton, and that is, it's important to be right. In fact, Trump was asked numerous times, about Sanders, and he said, look, the Sanders message, it's interesting. He says, I'm going to be taking a lot of things that Bernie's said and using them. He says, I can reread some of his speeches. I can get some, in many ways she shouldn't be there, he said. He said some things about her that are actually surprising. He said she's got bad judgment. And when he said bad judgment, I said, soundbite. And that's what we're going to hear a lot of. Now, he also tried to bait Bernie a little bit. He said, quote, Bernie's been very effective, but been treated very badly by the Democrats and the Democratic Party, and frankly should run as an independent. That's what he thinks. Now, look, Bernie running as an independent would make it a shoo-in for the Donald, which is why he would want to stoke that fire. It ain't going to happen. So there's that. But last night, a big night for the T-Rump, big night for Hillary as well. She took, 55.5% of the vote, beating Bernie by 12 points. I was surprised that Rocky De La Fuente, he got 14,200 votes. Kind of surprised by that. That would be the ultimate protest vote right there on the Democratic side. On the Republican side, the votes were kind of interesting as well. The T-Rump took the majority, almost 57%, followed by Edward Rafael Cruz, who took 21.6%, and then John Kasich had 19%. And then you get down to the other ones where you go, exactly, have you been paying attention? Because Marco Rubio got 11,704 votes. He's not even running anymore. Ben Carson got 14,580 votes, or almost a whole percent. So almost a whole percent, really stupid. And then the one that just confuses me to no end, 9,286 people actually voted for Jeb! Yeah, I mean, really, come on. Throw it in there. Yeah, Jeb.
Yeah, babe. Poor
really?
John.
Yeah.
Marco Rubio actually got more votes than John Kasich. Not in this particular election, but around the whatnots.
Yeah, I mean,
the whatnots. This is crazy.
But there you go. But what's interesting to me is Carson got the most of the people not running. So there you go. Now, some interesting other races for me anyway. The Senate race that we've been all watching, and we've had almost all of the candidates on. I didn't remember that Joe John Vadvarka was running again. We had him on the last time, and as I remembered, he wasn't very interesting. But he got 30,741 votes, and I go, wow, for a guy that that's the protest vote there. Now, John Fetterman got almost 20% of the vote on no money. Sestak took almost 34%, 33.8%, and Katie McGinty walked away with it with just over 44%. She will take on Pat Toomey in the fall, and I guess no surprise there, none.
No, not
really.
For me.
That is what it was. The Attorney General race, not surprising either. Josh Shapiro walked away with that with a 11-point win. He got 47%, Zappala 36%, and Morganelli 16%. They will face the Montgomery County State Senator John Rafferty, who walked away with the Republican side, 64-34. 36. So that'll be interesting.
Yes.
Interesting. They're both from Montgomery County.
Yeah.
So there's that. If you looked at the constitutional amendments, the one on age went down. That didn't pass, which said that Supreme Court justices who hit 70 have to retire now. They wanted to bump that up to 75. That did not go forward by the slimmest of margins. And on question 2, should we abolish the Philadelphia traffic court, which I can't imagine you're gonna make a constitutional amendment for, but that actually passed. And I gotta think that everything that anything outside of Philadelphia, everyone's like, screw Philadelphia. So you got to think, and I want to check if there's some data on this, that the entire center of the state, it almost had to be 100% to get rid of the Philadelphia traffic court. So there is that. Now, some of the interesting races that I was watching, and I know everyone has their favorite race. One of the ones that I was watching was the former, the 31st senatorial district, that of Pat Vance's. She used to be mine. Gerrymandering came in, and then they made me the fart cloud of the 30th. So I'm not in Vance's anymore. But Pat Vance, 80 years old, retiring, was somewhat moderate at the end of her career. Was not insane, was not completely off her rocker. She is being replaced by somebody who is. And it was a 4-way race of bad, worse, really bad, and then, wow, are you kidding me? Wow, are you kidding me? Walked away with a 52%. John Ritchie, the former football player, 30%. The dentist got 14%, and some guy that I didn't even know was running got 2.5%. So there is that. So he will be, the crazy guy will win because there's nobody running against him in the fall.
Is that the guy who did the commercial with the wrestling coach and the U.S. Marshals, whatnot?
Yes.
Okay. Yay.
Yes. That's
okay.
Him. He's a House rep right now, Mike Regan. So yeah, that's not good. Also, a couple other interesting races I was paying attention to. I wanted to see Darrell Metcalf go down in the primary. Since there was a Republican running against him, it didn't happen. He actually dispatched of the Republican challenger by greater than 19 points. So more Darrell. Also, the Democratic 46th race out in the western part of the state. You had Jesse White, who had been the incumbent last time around, lost to Jason Ortega. Wanted a rematch. Well, Jesse lost again. And I think, when you sue your own mother, that leaves a bad taste in folks' mouth. He lost by about 100 votes, like 96, I think it was. But I would have to think suing your own mother, Jesse, had a little bit to do with that.
Yeah, I think that's a judgment call there.
Just a little. It's one of those things that goes on the resume.
Really?
The 2nd congressional district, the U.S. For Congress, that one was a little interesting. I was watching to see if whom I assume is going to be a felon at some point in the future, Chaka Fattah, if he would pull it out. He did not. 4-way race. Dwight Evans will hold that seat now. So there you go. The really big shocker, if you had to have a shocker for the night,
and we need those.
The big shocker was the 9th congressional district. My former district, until gerrymandering put me in Barlotta's district, the guy from Hazleton, instead of the guy from Altoona. But Schuster almost lost the primary, and there's still some question because there's got to be some outstanding absentee ballots. He only beat this really crazy Tea Party guy by just a little under 1,000 votes.
Ooh.
The most powerful guy, one of the most powerful guys in Congress, Bill Schuster.
Yeah.
Head of the Transportation Committee, son of the Asphalt King, who had held that position for like 1,000 years.
Yeah.
Almost ousted. And who knows, it may happen, but
recount.
That is, you're talking 0.5%.
That's tiny.
Yeah.
That's
tiny. That will be interesting to watch in the coming days. The defeat of the night, I guess, came on the Democratic side in the 112th legislative district. Frank Farina, the incumbent, lost to Kevin Haggerty. So we're gonna see what that takes us. Also here, the big one that's going to be the big prized Republican one as well. We'll finish up. For the night, Rob Teplitz beat Alvin Taylor, and I think everyone thought that was going to happen on the Democratic side. On the Republican side, a squeaker where Giovanni M. DeSanto beat out Andrew Lewis in a squeaker. And I got to be honest, this DeSanto guy, scary. Whole lot of scary. And going to have a whole lot of money. This senatorial seat, Teplitz's seat, I think it's the 15th. This is at the top of Scott Wagner's hit list. There are going to be a couple $1 million spent on this race. And, at the end of it, Teplitz is a good guy. Yeah. Teplitz is a good representative, a hard worker. But the money, and DeSanto's huge money, they're really going to spend on this race because they've gerrymandered it to take it away from Teplitz. Yeah. This happens, we have big trouble because then you have a supermajority in the Senate, which could be, big trouble. So we got that to talk about. Whatever your races were, what'd you think of last night? Any surprises, any thoughts? I'd love to hear it. 1-888-520-RICK, 1-888-520-7425. You, any thoughts last night?
Just that there are a bunch of winners. All of them. They're all winners.
And a bunch of losers. Let's take a quick break. Right back after this. Stick around. You're listening to The Rick Smith Show. We're working people. Come to talk. I'm Rick Smith, and this is Labor History in 2. You have probably heard about the Red Scare, when thousands of people lost their jobs in the 1950s for allegedly harboring communist sympathies. But have you ever heard of the Lavender Scare that happened during those same years? Thousands of LGBT people lost their jobs due to discrimination. And on this day in labor history, the year was 1953. President Dwight David Eisenhower issued Executive Order 10450. The order declared that federal employees at all levels of government needed to be reliable, trustworthy, of good conduct and character, and of complete and unswerving loyalty to the United States. Later, the order listed reasons federal employees could be fired, including any criminal, infamous, dishonest, immoral, or notoriously disgraceful conduct, habitual use of intoxicants to excess, drug addiction, sexual perversion. That last item was widely understood as a euphemism for gay or lesbian activity. Major newspapers of the day often used the word perversion to refer to homosexuality. The argument was made that homosexual people were a potential threat to national security because foreign agents could blackmail them for information by threatening to reveal their sexual preferences. More than 1,400 federal employees lost their jobs within the first 4 months after President Eisenhower signed the executive order. This anti-homosexual discrimination extended beyond the federal government. Industries that relied on government contracts took the order as a cue to conduct similar purges. In 1957, World War II veteran and astronomer Dr. Frank Kameny was fired from the Army Map Service for being gay. After his firing, Dr. Kameny dedicated his life to leading the fight to end LGBT discrimination. Labor History in 2 brought to you by the Illinois Labor History Society and The Rick Smith Show. For more information, go to laborhistoryin2.com, like us on Facebook, and follow us on the Twitters at Labor History in 2.
This is the Media Matters Minute. I'm Coleman Lowndes. During a segment on Fox's The O'Reilly Factor, host Bill O'Reilly and Fox host Eric Bolling discussed drug incarceration rates. Listen to their conversation.
Oh, I think you have to go hard on drug dealers, distributors. Even the punks in the street? Even the punks in the street. I don't think it has anything to do with race. It has to do with what they're doing. They're providing access for kids, people, to hurt themselves.
And why does the left see it differently? And it's trying to diminish the harmfulness of their actions.
Well, Russell Simmons tried to make it about race. He said more blacks are incarcerated than whites, therefore it must be racist.
But that's a big issue.
Yeah, because maybe the more blacks are committing more of the same crimes.
But the truth is, O'Reilly is wrong. In fact, he has a history of campaigning against drug sentencing reform, despite the evidence that current laws target minorities. In 2014, the Washington Post reported that while whites and blacks use drugs at about the same rate, and whites are more likely to sell, blacks are, quote, far more likely to be arrested for sale and possession. For more on this and other stories, please visit MediaMatters.org.
Chances are, when you took a shower this morning, an AFSCME member made sure that water was clean. When you drove to work, an AFSCME member maintained the road. When you rode an elevator, an AFSCME member inspected it. I'm David Philman, Executive Director of AFSCME Council 13, the American Federation of State, County, and Municipal Employees. AFSCME members enforce regulations, keep prisoners behind bars, take care of patients, protect the environment, and more. The work isn't glamorous, the salaries aren't high, but AFSCME members serve the public in every aspect of our daily lives. Chances are, you'll never see that AFSCME member working in a sewage plant, diving underwater to repair a bridge, or answering a 911 call. But aren't you glad they do? For more information, visit AFSCME13.org. We are AFSCME. We make Pennsylvania happen!
Standing tall against a multinational corporate agenda. The Rick Smith Show.
All the things you want are real. You have you to complete, and there is no deal.
Well, we're waiting any minute now. The cruise camp is about to make a major, quote, a major announcement this afternoon there in Indiana. And it's widely expected. When I heard that there was a major announcement coming, I'm going, is he going to drop out or is he going to name someone as his vice president? And it looks like Carly Fiorina is going to be the person that he names as his VP because, hey, he came in second. He came in second here in Pennsylvania. He came in second almost everywhere. So why not go ahead and name that VP choice? Smart move. Anyway, here to talk a little bit about what happened last night, all of the results and the thoughts and comments. I've asked our good friend, attorney Erwin Aronson, to come talk with us. Erwin, what'd you think last night?
Well, I thought here in Pennsylvania that the outcome was pretty significantly consistent with what everybody expected. I have not yet had a chance to see the delegate election piece, and that's really what's critical in all of this because in Pennsylvania, as in so many states, people vote in effectively a beauty contest for the presidential candidates and vote separately for delegate candidates. So there is always a possibility that, say, Donald Trump won the Republican beauty contest, but we don't know clearly the number of delegates elected pledged to Trump at this point, although some who were running on behalf of or pledged to other candidates have indicated that they'll not deviate from the will of the electorate in their particular districts.
Right.
So at the presidential level, it came out pretty much as expected, both on the Republican and Democratic sides of the beauty contest primaries. Katie McGinty in the Senate race on the Democratic side got some great momentum in the last weeks before the primary, and that momentum carried her through, and she beat former Congressman Admiral Sistak, who had been campaigning for the job for basically 6+ years, having run against Toomey 6 years ago and narrowly lost. And he had been at it since then, and the early polling showed him ahead. But as I indicated, Katie McGinty pulled ahead and had some momentum and just took that race. And in the statewide attorney general's race, we had what we thought was going to be a pretty close contest between Montgomery County Commissioner Josh Shapiro and Allegheny County Attorney Stephen Zappala. And it turned out to be not so close at all. The voting in the Philadelphia and suburbs area swept Josh Shapiro into a pretty comfortable win there. So the other two statewide races, for Auditor General, of course, Eugene DePasquale won his primary for a second term, and the state treasurer's office is an open seat. And on the Democratic side, Joe Torsella, who had no opposition, obviously won handily, and the Republican candidate, who also had no opposition, won handily. So those are the statewide races. Few surprises in some of the legislative and state Senate races. Long time and truly illustrious, dedicated public servant named Mark Cohen out in the 202nd District of the State House of Representatives lost his primary, and that's very significant. He had been in the General Assembly since he won a special election way back in 1974, and I was involved in that special election in which he won. So it tells you a little bit about how long I've been playing this game.
Wow.
But Mark was very special and is still a very, very special member of the General Assembly, former chair of the House Labor Committee on multiple occasions, and just a very passionate advocate for workers and working men and women, and served his district with distinction for a long, long time, and unfortunately lost yesterday. So that was a bit of a heartbreak for those of us who follow those things. And closer to the Harrisburg area in York and a bit of Cumberland counties, a highly contested state Senate primary to replace retiring State Senator Pat Vance. John Ritchie, a local football star and former NFL star and NFL Players Association player rep, had what appeared to have been a really good chance to secure the nomination on the Republican side to succeed Senator Vance. Lost to State House of Representatives Rep Mike Reagan, and Reagan, who apparently is a Scott Wagner acolyte, spent a considerable portion of his final piece of the campaigning against Ritchie by asserting that Ritchie was a tool of the labor movement and of unions.
And just like Tom Wolf.
Yeah, just like Tom Wolf. Tom Wolf's favorite Senate candidate. So there were a couple of little things like that. The backstory is that there are like 114 or 115 members of the State House and State Senate who are unopposed now, that they've been through their primaries, and they have been assured re-election. So that's essentially half of all of the General Assembly seats are already decided here at the conclusion of the primary. So that's pretty shocking and pretty deep commitment to the status quo that has so many of us so frustrated.
So how did we turn that around? I mean, there are a number of places that are so badly gerrymandered that opposition just it's futile.
Well, one of the ways we turn that around is we start the battle now to change the way we draw legislative districts to something that is nonpartisan, as was envisioned, if you will, by the framers, as opposed to this partisan commitment to reelecting those in control at any cost and damn the people. A statutory redistricting and reapportionment commission really would be an order that is not controlled by any political party. Part of that change, however, has already taken place with our elections last year for the statewide judiciary and the election of a state Supreme Court slate of new justices. One would believe that there would be greater fairness in the redistricting and reapportionment process, simply because the tie vote will be cast, if there, to the degree there is one, by a member of a Supreme Court that is much less partisan than it was back in 2010, 2012, the last time we had to do redistricting and reapportionment.
Right. So what do you say to the person, though, Erwin, who says, what the real barrier is, while the gerrymandering is one thing, the real barrier is money, and that publicly financed elections are the answer?
I say you're absolutely right. With or without public financing, before we get to public financing, the whole notion of Citizens United and its mini Citizens United here in Pennsylvania, for example, a case called General Majority PAC versus Corbett and Eichel, that allows corporations to be deemed to be citizens that have free speech rights only for the purpose of passing out campaign cash, not for any other purposes like being incarcerated when they break the law. A true and meaningful method by which to address that little reality would be an exceptional, extraordinary, overwhelming help. And that's just the start. And then public financing, of course, is the next logical step, or if not public financing, then some meaningful limits on what can be spent. In Canada, they spend less on their entire bundle of national elections than we will spend here in Pennsylvania on one U.S. Senate race.
Wow.
And that's on their cycle. In other countries in Western Europe, there are real and meaningful caps, and candidates can't just go and spend money to bury their opponents. There has to be some equality and equanimity in that. There is some real commitment to equal time in the news media and things of that nature. So it goes. So we need to address that system. We also probably should be taking a look at whether we taxpayers need to continue to finance these primary elections, which are purely partisan political party activities, for only two political parties, the one called Democrat and the one called Republican. No other political party gets to participate in that process in any meaningful way, and no public activity is undertaken in that. It's just merely the nomination of candidates for individual private political parties.
Right. But since you brought that up, and I mean, I've had a lot of people ask me, why do we have closed primaries? Wouldn't it be better if we had just, everybody could vote for wherever and you'd have more candidates? I'm curious your thought.
Well, I don't think that would be better. I think that would be worse, because then we have manipulation of outcomes. We have people who are registered Democrat voting in Republican primaries, people who are registered Republican voting in Democratic primaries. That makes no sense, because these are really private activities. On the other hand, telling the political parties that this is your business, go for it, do what you need to do, would be somewhat logical in many fundamental ways. So that'd be my take on it.
Yeah, because I got a couple of emails. One from Randall, who pointed out that he's a Green. He doesn't get the vote. He's a Green,
exactly.
So there's nothing for him to do yesterday.
Exactly right. There is nothing for him to do, and that's not unreasonable in context. And when I say it's not unreasonable in context, it's not unreasonable simply because Randall is the member of a private political party, the Green Party, and he doesn't get to vote because the Green Party doesn't have a primary. I'm a member of a private political party as well, and I got to vote because my political party happens to be favored for some reason, and I don't get that. And that's something that needs some attention as we move forward in planning and plotting these things out.
Interesting. Last question I've got for you. Anything that took you yesterday in the results? Anything surprising? Anything that made you take a look at? For me, it was the 9th congressional district, the Republican side, with Bill Schuster almost going down in his primary there. That was the thing that kind of took me.
Yeah, that was a surprise and a bit of a backlash to the status quo, and something that some folks have been calling the Trump effect. We had the same thing out in Western Pennsylvania. Representative Metcalf faced a strong challenge. He beat it back, but there was a strong challenge there for Metcalf, who has been so obnoxiously, openly, and notoriously beating up on working people in Pennsylvania and using the power of his high office to do exactly that. So there were a few like that, but I think the Schuster one is probably the one that gets most of our attention, not just yours.
Yeah.
That was significant. One I didn't get to see the final results on yet that I'm intrigued by was the constitutional amendment to change the irrational mandatory retirement age for Pennsylvania judicial officers from 70 to 75. And I haven't seen final numbers on that, so I don't know exactly how that came out, but I'll be intrigued by that when I get to see it.
Well, I can save you the trouble. It went down. Yep. It went down in defeat.
It did.
Okay. It went down in defeat, 49 to 50. It was people voting yes, 1.1 million, 1.164818 to 1.211. Very, very slim margin, but it went down. But hey, the Philadelphia Traffic Court Amendment, overwhelmingly get rid of it.
Yeah. Okay. Well,
so there you go.
There's some intrigue. Well, that kind of shows that people were picking and choosing. That they were feeling as if they were appropriately informed voters, and that's positive.
There you go. Erwin, I appreciate the time, man. Thanks so much.
Thank you. Good to talk to you, Rick.
Always great to talk to our friend Erwin Aronson. Let's take a quick break. Right back after this. Stick around. You're listening to The Rick Smith Show.
Aussie scab, or will you be a man?
This is Solidarity News on Radio Labour.
This is a Radio Labour special report recorded on Wednesday, April 27th, 2016. I'm Mark Boulanger. With the result too close to call, electors in the UK are headed to a June 23rd referendum on continued membership in the European Union. Most of the largest unions in the country, plus the National Trades Union Congress, are campaigning in support of staying in the EU. The unions include Unite, the largest union with 1.4 million members, Unison with 1.3 million, and the GMB with about 700,000 members. A smaller union, the National Union of Rail, Maritime and Transport Workers, commonly known as the RMT, with about 80,000 members, has declared its opposition to the European Union and wants Britain out. Proponents of the UK staying in the EU say that many advances in labour law and practices have come from and are guaranteed by the EU. Supporters of what has been dubbed Brexit, Britain's exit, say that the EU has been pushing government austerity programs which have caused much damage. Some right-wing supporters of Brexit have complained about the number of migrant workers entering the UK from other European countries. The governing Conservative government is arguing for Britain to stay in the EU, but some of its prominent members, such as Boris Johnson, the Mayor of London, are calling for an exit. The Trades Union Congress, which represents all the major unions, including the RMT, is firmly in support of the UK remaining in the European Union. Frances O'Grady is the General Secretary of the Trades Union Congress, the TUC. She spoke recently to a convention of the National Union of Students about Britain, the EU, and the June 23rd referendum.
I just want to say a very quick word about Europe, because we are now so close to that referendum on our membership of the EU. Now, the TUC's position is very clear. We believe that a Brexit would pose a real threat to workers' jobs, our livelihoods and our rights. Many of the rights that we take for granted, from equal rights for part-time workers to stronger protection against discrimination and, of course, paid holidays. These have been won because unions banded together across borders, and we won it through the EU, and it's now guaranteed by the EU. Rights that working students rely on and that union agreements build on. Now, I know there are different views about the referendum, and I respect that. And I share the view that the EU is far from perfect, but believe that we can only win change from within. And I will tell you this for nothing, delegates. I won't be taking any lectures from the likes of Boris Johnson about what's best for workers. And I certainly won't stand by and let migrant workers get scapegoated for everything from lousy pay to pressure on public services. Delegates, migrants aren't the enemy. Exploitation is. And if politicians really want to tackle the problems that workers and students face, then it's simple. Stop the cuts and start investing. Get tough on bad bosses and rip off landlords. And instead of kowtowing to big corporations and the banks, stand up for the interests of workers, students and citizens, for a fairer, greener Europe with great jobs and homes at its heart. So when June the 23rd comes, I hope students turn out in force to get your voices heard. Because from student tuition fees to mental health services, the NHS, rights at work, at the heart of all of these debates, it's about values. It's about what kind of society we want to live in, what kind of education can serve everyone, what kind of economy can work for all. There is nothing inevitable about the world that we face now. There is nothing inevitable or natural about inequality. The status quo is not the only option. Another Europe, another world is possible.
Thank you for listening. And remember, it's all about global solidarity.
Frankly, if Hillary Clinton were a man, I don't think she'd get 5% of the vote. The only thing she's got going is the woman's card. And the beautiful thing is women don't like her, okay? And look how well I did with women tonight. Okay?
Fighting for women's health care and paid family leave and equal pay is playing the woman cards and deal me in. This girl is on fire.
This girl is on fire. Well, I gotta tell you, you can expect a lot more of that come November. But if you watch the video of Trump doing his the woman card, it's the only reason she got more than woman card. The expression on Mary Pat Christie's face, priceless. If you think the look on Chris Christie's face was bad, you should have looked at his wife's face. First, someone should teach Chris if he's going to be on the stage and, do the genuflecting to the Trump. They should at least do something with his face because, to be honest, he looks like, I think I said it earlier, he looks like he's loading his pants. It's just sad.
Oh, it's bad. It's bad. And Mary Pat just obviously just doesn't want to be seen. Just doesn't want to be seen at all.
Oh, you look at this and you go, really? And I understand this is what it's going to be. This is going to be this kind of mud fight. It's already begun. This is the first jab of the general election. It's over now. The primaries are over. We're just going through the last vestiges of we're going to try.
We're gasping.
It's done. There's going to be no second ballot in Cleveland, even though I wish and I hope and I pray and all of that stuff. Not going to happen.
Nah.
So this is the beginning of the election come November. And this first opening jab, I think, is going to set that tone of get ready for a mud battle, get ready for Jello wrestling, whatever it is. This is what it's going to be.
Oh, most definitely. Honestly, was there ever any doubt? Was there?
No.
Really?
No.
This idea that, look, he's getting more presidential.
Yeah, but
Trumpers is getting more presidential.
He colored in the white spots where the orange wasn't.
Oh, God.
But here's the thing, and this is what gets me, and maybe you can help me because I'm struggling with it. How is it that any women vote for him? At the end of the day, he won the Republican primary over the other ones, 10% more women than the other candidates. And here in Pennsylvania, Maryland, and Connecticut, he won with more than 20% more of the female vote than the other ones did. How is that possible?
Well, I think just to begin with, the Republican platform does not necessarily speak to the sanest among us to begin with. And when it comes to Trump, there's no one who respects women more than him.
Yeah,
no one.
Because he wants to do his daughter.
Oh, hashtag Trump wants to do his daughter. I don't know how a woman can honestly vote for that man.
Especially when you look at the latest USA Today Suffolk University poll that show that 66% of female voters have an unfavorable view of Trump.
Yeah.
When you've got 2/3 of the electorate going, I have an how do you then go to the poll and have him beating the other ones by such wide margins? I don't get it.
The numbers are unlike anything, at least I've ever seen here. You do not have a presumptive nominee with unfavorables in the 60s, and that's where his are.
Oh, yeah.
He has this very motivated base that he is working with here, right? That's very malleable to a certain extent, but at the same time, his unfavorables are just out of the norm.
Well, you look
out of the norm.
You look at earlier this month, there was the Washington Post ABC poll that found that 64% of women feel, quote, strongly unfavorable towards Trump.
Yeah.
So just to highlight your point, 66% see it unfavorably in the one poll, 64% strongly unfavorable.
There really isn't a middle ground here. I don't think he's really left any room for a middle ground when it comes to the statements that he has made and just this legacy that he has with women that... And I don't mean that in a personal sense. I mean that in a sense of his whole career is based off of objectifying women to a large extent. And
because he's got big hands, remember that.
Big hands. Big hands. But I just don't think that this is going to bode very well for him in the general election, because women actually vote more than men. We do, actually.
Oh, there are more of you.
There are more of us. There are more of us. But this isn't going to go well for that if he really thinks he's going to.
I hope that, but, I keep going back to 1980. And maybe it's just me, but, the Carter campaign wanted Reagan. Reagan was the crank. He was the outside, and he was the crazy one. And then you had Operation Eagle Claw. Then you had the October surprise. And then
no,
so much scary here. But I'll be honest. Out of the three that are left on the Republican side, Trump is the least bad.
I don't know.
Digest that for a second.
It's so sad. It's so sad. It's so sad that it's almost true.
No, it's not almost true.
Some would argue that Kasich is slightly less,
See, some would argue
crazy.
that, but they would be wrong. Because Kasich was in that class of 2010 of governors like Walker, like LePage, like Snyder, like Corbett. He was in that same class, read from the same Koch brother playbook.
No, I'm not.
All of that horrible anti-worker stuff, all of that stuff. He's just as crazy. The problem is he's surrounded by really crazy.
Yes. And on a domestic front, yes. Crazy. But let's face it, foreign policy-wise, when it comes to presidential power to, represent us internationally, Trump is not okay here. This is not a good one. Honestly,
none of them are.
No, none of them are. But
hawks.
At least Kasich isn't out there advocating for war crimes. Okay, let's just lower the bar to that.
All right,
Can
so
we
we're
lower the bar to
not going to commit war crimes?
Can you say that, will you not say that we're going to commit war crimes? All right. At least he doesn't want us committing war crimes.
Okay, well,
at least he hasn't said it so far.
That doesn't fit on a bumper sticker, but I guess it's a good campaign slogan.
He won't commit war crimes. There you go. That's the slogan for his
campaign. You should be a campaign strategist for him.
I should. He needs help. Desperately.
Oh, my goodness.
Marco Rubio beat him. Marco Rubio didn't even vote, from what I understand, did he?
No. He needed another job. And look, he's going to do very well for himself as well.
Yes, he will.
But he got votes yesterday here in Pennsylvania, which he's not even running.
Nope.
And you had thousands of people who voted for him, which is just kind of nuts. Just insane to me. But here's the thing. I was reading a Washington Post article, and I think I read the dumbest thing I've ever read in a newspaper, because it's, duh, no kidding. They wrote that Clinton strategists think women are likely to be the key to a general election victory for the former Secretary of State.
Yeah.
Really? Do you think? Do you think? I think voters are going to be important. This one especially, voters are going to be important.
Well, gee, that had never occurred to me. Come on now, people. But at the same time, I do sort of get a little bit hesitant here when we talk about, the woman vote, as if all women vote one way for one specific reason. And that's a really bad premise to come into this with. You had a lot of women voting for Carly Fiorina, who obviously are not the same kinds of women voting for Hillary Clinton here. They're not going to really cross over for any reason here, So this idea that there is a woman vote, that this giant monolith where we put all those ladies and we just put them in that box and they're all going to vote one way, doesn't exist.
All right, so we're gonna break them up, pit them against each other. We can put the soccer moms versus the security moms, which is always my favorite one.
Security moms.
Don't you remember that? During the Bush years, because they were the Hawks. They were the security moms.
They
were the ones who were fighting for the country.
Helicopter moms.
They sliced and diced women up during that period, and we're going to see it again.
Of course.
I mean, what Trump is going to do, and look, he's going to do what Bush had to do.
Mm-hmm.
You're going to have to slice them up, pit them against one another, and have them start eating each other.
And that is honestly something that has, for a lot of marginalized populations throughout society, that is where we honestly end up doing ourselves the most disservice, is when we allow ourselves, as people, whether that be women, people of color, workers, when we allow the powers that be, the moneyed interests, to dictate what it is that we should care about, what our priorities are. And when we allow ourselves to be sliced and diced. When we reject solidarity, that's when we get beaten. Badly.
Badly.
Very badly.
So I'm still waiting for the big Ted Cruz announcement. Hopefully we will find that. Going to take a quick break as I go and take a look and wait for the big announcement. Quick break. Right back. Stick around.
Controversial, thought-provoking, opinionated. Rick Smith.
I've concluded that there are two kinds of people in our world. Those willing to believe there are only two kinds of people, and those who think it's a bit more complex than that. Speaking of questionable enumerations, the list of the 10 worst jobs of 2012 is out, and I seem to have 2 of them. Both newspaper reporter and broadcaster made the list. Okay, I'm not technically a reporter, I'm a columnist, but let's not be picky. These used to be considered quasi-glamorous gigs, but CareerCast, the online compiler of the list, says that the decline in job opportunities and pay in the media world, plus the rise in on-the-job stress, have pushed these down to the 5th and 10th worst career choices out there. It's true that the pay is lower middle class, but there's no heavy lifting, and hey, us commentator types essentially get paid just for running our mouths. Pretty good work if you can get it. Top of the worst list is lumberjack. I can see that. Yes, being outdoors is a plus if the weather's good, but screaming chainsaws and huge trees crashing down would put you on edge every day and maybe in your grave. Dairy farmers rank number 2. It's a noble profession in my view, but most people don't realize that these hard-working and skilled yeomen literally are married to their cows. The lady bovines have to be milked twice a day, including weekends and holidays, no matter the weather or whether you're sick or tired. Other bottom tenors are oil rig workers. Can you say BP? Dishwashers. They get no respect and sorry pay. Butchers. Missing fingers are a routine job hazard there. And waiting tables, lousy pay and constant abuse from managers and customers alike. This is Jim Hightower saying, however, millions of Americans today can tell you that by far the worst job is looking for one.
Hightower's commentaries are brought to you by the Hightower Lowdown, the monthly newsletter with Hightower's populist take on what the powers that be are up to. Find out more at hightowerlowdown.org.
From United Nations headquarters in New York, this is your World in 2 Minutes. I'm your host, Luke Vargas, for Talk Media News. 10 days after a major earthquake hit Ecuador, the country is still reeling as it attempts to distribute food, get children back to school, and evaluate the safety of thousands of damaged buildings. According to UN estimates, more than 120,000 children have no access to school, and the world body warns that aid supplies risk being mismanaged across a damaged and strained transport grid. The Ecuadorian government says it's got the situation under control, but the cost of rebuilding is likely to present a major challenge. With the low price of oil dampening state revenues, President Rafael Correa is increasing taxes and issuing new bonds to try and raise several $billions. A sign of how bad things are in the country, Correa, a socialist who's long criticized privatization of key industries, is reportedly considering selling off state assets to fund the country's recovery. And more than 60 million people remain affected by the ongoing El Niño weather cycle, the UN said in a report Tuesday. The majority of those affected face malnutrition after the weather phenomena sparked droughts in eastern and southern Africa, Southeast Asia, and Central America. Across southern Africa, 11 countries are considered moderately or highly affected by the driest cropping season in at least 35 years. Even though the current El Niño cycle is expected to end in the next few months, the UN predicts that humanitarian needs won't peak until early next year, after a second weak harvest in a row. The World Food Program predicts that in southern Africa, that harvest could cause the number of people in need of food aid to double, from 30 million to more than 60 million people. For more global news headlines, visit TalkMediaNews.com.
So, we won the evangelicals.
We won with young. We won with old. We won with highly educated. We won with poorly educated. I love the poorly educated. We're the smartest people. We're the most loyal people.
Yes, I love the poorly. I love how he puts it together. I love the poorly educated, but we're the smartest people in the world. You can't make that stuff up. And I got to be honest. There's a small part of me, that part of me that goes, you know what? He will make my job so much easier for the next 4 years if he's president. All I have to do is open the front page of the newspaper, and whatever dumb stuff comes out of his mouth, that will be the content for the day's program. I mean, I remember the Bush years. They were full of gold. You know, like America's 10th, and that's just 10 spots too low. Think about that one. Or I shake the hand of the man who stood up to Saddam Hussein, even though both his hands were missing. You got to love those things. And I should bring that CD back because there were so many great things. So many. My favorite story about him, though, was that, and Laura told this, gave it away. Evidently, he thought that you could milk a horse. And now I don't know what he was doing in the barn with the horse. Not quite sure. I'm sure the horse probably liked it. Just a thought. Just kind of a thought. Or the sad stuff where, you know, we're in the middle of a war. And this was infuriating to me. And I used to play this clip a lot. He's at the press club dinner. Basically does a video of himself going around the Oval Office, picking up pillows off the couch, going, yep, no weapons of mass destruction there. While people are dying looking for the weapons of mass destruction that they knew weren't there. That's not funny. So all of the stupid Bushisms, yeah, kind of funny stuff there. Like my other favorite, I know that human beings and fish can coexist peacefully. Another one of my favorites. And Samantha looks at me like, he didn't really say that. Yes, he did. That was our president. So when someone says we can't get a really stupid president, had one. Just kind of a thought. Anyway, good news. It appears the workers from the Indiana Carrier plant, they're taking their case all the way to the United Trade Commission. They are going to try and say, look, you know, at the end of the day, this is they're taking their, what am I talking about? They're taking it right to the United Technologies, to the board members, saying, look, hey, this is costing you money. They're initially going to lose 2,200 jobs, I guess, right from the start, 1,400 there in Indianapolis. And, you know, look, at the end of this, at some point, shareholders have got to be held accountable in this as well. So we're going to be reaching out to folks to talk about this plan, because the whole idea, move those jobs overseas, more money to buy back the shares, pump up the cost of the price of the shares, more dividends for the shareholders, and of course more CEO pay. But screw the community, screw the workforce. So something else we're going to be looking into when we come back on Monday. It's just nuts. And, you know, if you think Donald Trump's going to be the guy to stop this, well, maybe take a look at the Chinese-made shirt that has his name on it. Just a thought. And for all the talk of he's going to be tough on China, no, not going to happen. He's simply tapping into the anger that's out there. Sanders was the guy who was going to do that. But sadly, doesn't look like that's going to happen. We'll take a quick break. When we come back, we're going to talk about education funding here in Pennsylvania and why now is the time we should be getting involved. Quick break, right back. You're listening to The Rick Smith Show. For more information, go to thericksmithshow.com. If you've missed any portion of the program, you can download the podcast at thericksmithshow.com.
You're listening to WIN, Workers Independent News, a production of Diversified Media Enterprises. I'm Doug Cunningham. The Warehouse Workers Resource Center says it expects mass firings of hundreds of workers who have been active demanding better wages and working conditions at Cal Cartage. The firings are expected April 30th at the warehouse serving the Port of Los Angeles. Hundreds of workers are facing the mass retaliation for trying to organize and use their labor rights. The Warehouse Workers Resource Center says this is unacceptable, and they believe it's illegal. An online petition has been launched telling the Port of Los Angeles that the firings are unjust and demanding that Cal Cartage retain all the workers who are facing termination. About 80 Independent Pilots Association UPS pilots are honoring picket lines in Cologne, Germany for a 24-hour strike of German UPS workers. IPA spokesman Brian Godet.
Anytime there's a legal picket line against UPS and we're in a position to support that other union, we choose to. Cologne is our largest hub in Germany, and the German workers there are fantastic and do a great job of taking care of our pilots. And if they felt they needed to take a day-long strike against UPS, we're not going to cross those lines. We're going to honor those lines.
Godet says about 60 UPS flights will be affected. Ford Motor Company says it will invest $1.6 billion in production plants in Livonia, Michigan, and in Ohio. The investments were in the 4-year contract reached last year with the United Auto Workers. Ford committed to investing $9 billion in the U.S. over the life of the contract as part of the union's collective bargaining effort. UAW Vice President Jimmy Settles says he's thrilled that the UAW was able to secure these investment commitments in the collective bargaining contract. Ford's $9 billion in U.S. investments over 4 years will create an estimated 8,500 American jobs. On International Workers' Day, May 1st, members of the International Longshore and Warehouse Union, Local 10 in San Francisco, will be calling for a national day of mourning for black and brown unarmed victims of police killings. The ILWU was established after the West Coast waterfront strike in 1934, where maritime workers faced police violence. Derek H. Mohammed is Local 10 Secretary-Treasurer.
Police brutality is a big issue that mostly communities of color have had to deal with historically. The current situation with the police brutality in America, there has certainly been an increase. And since we are a union that has historically sided with the marginalized, the underprivileged, we felt it necessary to raise our voices in opposition to what's going on as it relates to police brutality and terror.
Workers Independent News is brought to you with support from union-owned and represented Bank of Labor, member FDIC, equal opportunity lender. Bank of Labor has earned the reputation as a leader in union business lending by understanding the needs of labor unions. Online at bankoflabor.com.
You've been listening to WIN, Workers Independent News. For more information, visit laborradio.org.
Anybody who thinks that we have not been meeting our obligation with respect to students and education in the Commonwealth of Pennsylvania is mistaken. We continue to meet our obligation because we have enabled or we directly tax $27 billion in educational funding in the Commonwealth of Pennsylvania.
Welcome back to the Rick Smith Show. There's Speaker of the House, Mike Turzai. Hey, we care about education. We spend the same amount of money that we spent, 5 years, 6 years ago. Doesn't matter. They throw out big numbers so that you go, oh, it's a lot of money. What's our need? And that's the question. What do we need to be spending money on? How much do our kids need? How much should we be spending in the classrooms? And you go back to the 4 years, and let's not forget those 4 horrible Corbett years, where $1 billion was cut from K through 12 education each and every year. Because that first cut, that first $1 billion, they didn't put it back the next year. They didn't put it back the year after that. They didn't put it back the year after that. To me, that's $4 billion they cut from education. And what they wanted to do to higher ed, if you remember the first budget, they wanted to cut half of all of the money that we spend in higher ed here in the state of Pennsylvania, which to me is disgraceful. And I got to be honest, the Republicans in Congress here in the General Assembly right now, no, not doing much better either, which is why we've asked Dr. Kenneth Mash, president of APSCUF, the Association of Pennsylvania State College and University Faculties, to come talk with us. Ken, thanks for taking time for us.
Well, thank you, Rick. It's always great to be on.
So we see this, this frame out there. We spend so much money on education, Ken. How much is enough? Yet we've got a pretty good sizable need, right?
We've got, I listened to what you had on about basic ed, and it's true for basic ed, and it's certainly true for higher education, particularly public higher education. We had those cuts in 2011, and then every year since this, up until this year, there was no increase whatsoever. This year we were fortunate to get 5% increase, but it doesn't come anywhere close to the, nearly 18% increase. 18% cut that was done in 2011. So, we're all trying to do more with less.
Right. And now you guys, as I understand as a union, have said that, contract negotiations, as I understand it, not going well, but the faculty members and your members have said, we're not going to strike this year, even though I would say now's probably the time to do it. But out of support for the students and all that stuff, you guys have said, we're going to hold off to the fall, as I understand, right?
Yeah. I mean, it's hard to say that it's not going well because it's just not going. We haven't had a meeting. We're going to meet tomorrow, but we haven't had a meeting since January to discuss the contract. And our members are annoyed. We are the only public sector union that did not get a one-year deal, and that's because we don't deal directly with the governor. We deal with the Board of Governors of the State System of Higher Education, and they're largely made up of Corbett appointees. So we're still pretty much dealing with the old administration and the old administration's mentality rather than with Governor Wolf's people who have been there for a year.
Yeah, and going back to that mentality, I would have to assume, and maybe you'll correct me if I'm wrong, it's about keeping qualified staff, keeping qualified people in the state system, which I think is the jewel of our Commonwealth, the envy, I would argue, of the nation, having the state system that we have, but also not having it become one of these adjunct-focused kind of systems.
Yeah, we have 14 great universities, and we operate and we do the best that we can. We've certainly felt the hurt over the years of the lack of funding, but we just continue to do a great job for our students. We're always proud that we really educate the working class in Pennsylvania. That is, we are the affordable option, and I think that we still do a great job at that. But certainly, we take a hit. We've lost 500 employees in the state system. Class sizes are growing. We've got, programs that are being cut, and the list goes on and on. So, you just, at some point, you try and do more with less, but eventually you're just doing less with less. And, we think that we have to reach a point where, yes, you're right, we have to be able to attract quality faculty. We have to keep those faculty who are here. We cannot, say, because what the state system had wanted us to do was to take major cuts to our health care package in order to get a small step increase in our contract, the same increases that the other unions had, and they were never asked to do that. But and they put that always in the terms of, this is cost savings. And, that's kind of a joke. It's not cost savings. That's cost, shifting. Right. It means that the faculty and even the coaches would have to pay more.
Yeah, and it's less in your compensation package. So if you're giving me a raise but taking it all away in increased health care contributions, what did you actually get? And the answer is nothing. So, in looking at the budgeting process, which has been, just a nightmare this last year with a very recalcitrant Republican General Assembly, I understand there was a hearing recently on higher ed. How did that go?
Well, it was the appropriations committees in both the House and the Senate held hearings, and from our perspective, they were pretty darn ugly. It was very clear, particularly in the Senate hearings, that there was just downright hostility towards unions, towards the faculty. Our union came up several times. There was beating up on our contract by senators. And the usual crew of people, Eichelberger and Wagner and Alloway, beating up on us, blaming us for the situation, when in fact, this 5% increase was the only increase we had gotten since the cuts of 2011. I don't understand how the burden can be placed on the professors when, in fact, the legislature has defaulted. I mean, at one time, Rick, when these universities became the state system, the Commonwealth was picking up 75% of the cost for the students.
Yep.
Now it's down below 25%. And if we look at it in terms of these new per credit tuition plans that they're proposing, it'll even go down below that. So we're seeing, this real attempt to privatize. But, there were absurd things said there. At one point, they asked how much money we make, and they gave a number that was out of the ballpark. I have no idea where they got that, the figure that they got from. And then they said, and you only work 17 hours a week. They counted, our class time and our office hours, and apparently that's the only hours we work. When my colleagues work, sometimes 50, 60-hour weeks, working with students, doing service to the university, doing research, and all the other things that faculty members do to try and keep our universities great universities.
Yeah, well, I mean, if you look at the folks, and I look at a guy named Brad Roy, the representative, and I'm sure you've seen the quote where he says, we'll fund higher education, but we won't do any of those Walmart, those pre-Walmart degrees, like art and humanities and, philosophy, those things. I'm not going to do any of that. We're going to only do, things that are good for business. And I thought that was really very short-sighted, but I got to be honest, not surprising.
Yeah, well, what makes it even worse, I think he actually said a poetry degree. I don't know what university he's looking at that gives a poetry degree. But anyway, it's not just, it's totally wrong-headed, completely wrong-headed. Students do well when they have a diverse education that trains them in critical thinking.
Right.
It doesn't matter whether you're going into business or whatever it is that you're going to be doing. You're supposed to be learning multiple ways of looking at the world. And that's what private schools are going to continue to do. So in essence, when we have legislators saying that our public universities should not be able to provide these things to our students, in essence what they're saying is, working class students who go to our universities because they are affordable options do not deserve the same type of education that students would get when they could afford to go to these private universities.
Excellent point.
And I think that, I think it's part of an overall plan where they don't think that our students are worthy. They're not worthy of that type of education. They're not worthy of having big dreams. They're not worthy even of being successful, because if you look at the research that's out there, the CEOs, nationally, the CEOs, when they do surveys, when they ask them what they want to see in a college graduate, they don't talk about the specifics of business training. They don't talk about technical career stuff. What they say is they want students who can read, who can write, who can do math, and most of all, who can think critically and get along with other people.
Yep.
And those are the very things that these people are criticizing.
Yeah, and it's, I guess it's not surprisingly, because these aren't people who think critically. These aren't people who can get along with others. These aren't people who can do a lot of those things that you laid out. So it's, I guess, not surprising to me.
Yeah, and what gets me often, and Senator Wagner was up there, and we can talk about some of the things that he was saying, just absolutely not true. But as far as a bold statement goes, he's up there again saying, I will not raise taxes. I won't vote to raise taxes. I will make sure my colleagues won't raise taxes. And I don't know about everybody else, but I'm kind of tired of that argument when I know that, the state isn't increasing taxes, but because it's not meeting its share, that the school taxes are going up, local taxes go up, and then, and at our universities, tuition continues to go up. Yeah, there's no state tax, but what we've done is we're creating a system where the people who can afford it the least are the ones who are winding up footing the bill.
And since you said that, I mean, the reality is, and I go back to the statistic you gave a moment ago, that back in the 1980s, the state was picking up 3/4 of the cost of a state system education. The students were picking up about 1/4. That I now understand is completely flipped the other way. You talk about the large student loan debt that kids are suffering under. I mean, all we've seen is a massive redistribution of wealth going from big business and people like Scott Wagner to families who are struggling to send their kids to college, perhaps for the first time.
Right. And, all this is going to do is make it harder. Now, some of our administrations, I talked for a moment ago about these per-credit tuition plans. It's in place at Millersville. Indiana is interested in doing it. Shippensburg's interested in doing it. Mansfield, it looks like, is going to do it, and maybe even one or two more. And what this means is for students, normally when you went to college, and for your listeners, if they went to college, probably, what happens is when you go full-time, you are allowed to take, from a 12 usually to an 18 or even 21 credit range for the same price.
Right.
What they've in essence said is, no, from now on what can happen is you can go and take those first 12 credits. But for every credit that you take beyond that, you have got to pay more. So what they've done, by essence, by doing this is say, look, we're going to, if you do the math, it's really quite simple. It takes 120 credits to graduate. That comes out over 4 years and 8 semesters into 15 credits a semester. If you can only take 12 and now you got to pay for those 3 extra credits, that's a 25% tuition increase. 25%. Now, they've softened it a little bit at IUP, but, that's going to cost working-class families $1,000 more a year to go to college. And, they soft-pedal it. They come up with, it might as well be Madison Avenue, the way they're trying to talk about these things by saying, this benefits people. It stops people from grazing the academic vineyard. That's the term that the chancellor used.
Wow.
That it allows students to go part-time or not subsidizing full-time students. Baloney. This is a tuition increase, and it's a massive one.
Absolutely.
And I sat there, at Board of Governors meetings, and the Corbett appointees on that board, they would, after the Corbett slashed the budget, if it was a 2% tuition increase, they were wringing their hands, and they were all disturbed and worried. Now we have a new governor, and all of a sudden, a 25% tuition increase is okay. So I struggle sometimes to understand.
I'm with you. I'm struggling with it. So last line of questioning I've got for you then. What do we do about this? I mean, I'm hearing about this, and I've talked about this, over the last couple of months, and I'm sure a lot of people for the first time are hearing this and just kind of jaw agape. What do we do about this?
Yeah, the answer is always, we have elections coming up for people to participate in those elections. It's a matter of writing to your representatives and saying enough is enough. It is a matter of, writing a letter to the editor of the newspaper because they see that, visiting your legislator, or even, if you have a student in one of our universities or you're thinking of going to one of our universities, write to the chancellor and say that these kinds of tuition plans are just unacceptable.
Or maybe, in my view, you do like they do in other countries, and the students should go on strike.
Yeah, well, I think at some point, we were waiting. We kept on hearing that students at these schools with the tuitions going up were starting to get activated. I think that the way that they've marketed it to students has been, frankly, just very deceptive. But I think when the parents start to get those bills, they're going to answer some serious questions about what's going on.
Yeah, good point. If there's anything we can do, anything that pops up, we'd love to have you come back and fill us in and inform us on what's going on. Because at all costs, in my view, we need to save those 14 universities, the jewel of education here in the Commonwealth, and make sure that our kids got an opportunity at an education.
Thank you, Rick. It's always a pleasure.
Great talking with you, Ken. Dr. Kenneth Mash, president of APSCOF, the Association of Pennsylvania State College and University Faculties. You want to take a look at their website? We've got a link at thericksmithshow.com. Just click on Ken's name, take you right there. Quick break. Right back. Stick around. You listen to The Rick Smith Show. We're working people. Come to talk.
We want the world and we want it now. We're going to take it anyhow. We want the airwaves.
Not right wing, just right. The Rick Smith Show.
I'm Rick Smith. and this is Labor History in 2. You have probably heard about the Red Scare, when thousands of people lost their jobs in the 1950s for allegedly harboring communist sympathies. But have you ever heard of the Lavender Scare that happened during those same years? Thousands of LGBT people lost their jobs due to discrimination. And on this day in labor history, the year was 1953. President Dwight David Eisenhower issued Executive Order 10450. The order declared that federal employees at all levels of government needed to be reliable, trustworthy, of good conduct and character, and of complete and unswerving loyalty to the United States. Later, the order listed reasons federal employees could be fired, including any criminal, infamous, dishonest, immoral, or notoriously disgraceful conduct, habitual use of intoxicants to excess, drug addiction, sexual perversion. That last item was widely understood as a euphemism for gay or lesbian activity. Major newspapers of the day often used the word perversion to refer to homosexuality. The argument was made that homosexual people were a potential threat to national security because foreign agents could blackmail them for information by threatening to reveal their sexual preferences. More than 1,400 federal employees lost their jobs within the first 4 months after President Eisenhower signed the executive order. This anti-homosexual discrimination extended beyond the federal government. Industries that relied on government contracts took the order as a cue to conduct similar purges. In 1957, World War II veteran and astronomer Dr. Frank Kameny was fired from the Army Map Service for being gay. After his firing, Dr. Kameny dedicated his life to leading the fight to end LGBT discrimination. Labor History in 2 brought to you by the Illinois Labor History Society and The Rick Smith Show. For more information, go to laborhistoryin2.com, like us on Facebook, and follow us on the Twitters at Labor History in 2.
This is the Media Matters Minute. I'm Coleman Lowndes. During a segment on Fox's The O'Reilly Factor, host Bill O'Reilly and Fox host Eric Bolling discussed drug incarceration rates. Listen to their conversation.
Oh, I think you have to go hard on drug dealers, distributors. Even the punks in the street? Even the punks in the street. I don't think it has anything to do with race. It has to do with what they're doing. They're providing access for kids, people, to hurt themselves.
And why does the left see it differently? And it's trying to diminish the harmfulness of their actions.
Well, Russell Simmons tried to make it about race. He said more blacks are incarcerated than whites, therefore it must be racist.
But that's a big issue.
Yeah, because maybe the more blacks are committing more of the same crimes.
But the truth is, O'Reilly is wrong. In fact, he has a history of campaigning against drug sentencing reform, despite the evidence that current laws target minorities. In 2014, the Washington Post reported that while whites and blacks use drugs at about the same rate, and whites are more likely to sell, blacks are, quote, far more likely to be arrested for sale and possession. For more on this and other stories, please visit MediaMatters.org.
Chances are, when you took a shower this morning, an AFSCME member made sure that water was clean. When you drove to work, an AFSCME member maintained the road. When you rode an elevator, an AFSCME member inspected it. I'm David Philman, Executive Director of AFSCME Council 13, the American Federation of State, County, and Municipal Employees. AFSCME members enforce regulations, keep prisoners behind bars, take care of patients, protect the environment, and more. The work isn't glamorous, the salaries aren't high, but AFSCME members serve the public in every aspect of our daily lives. Chances are, you'll never see that AFSCME member working in a sewage plant, diving underwater to repair a bridge, or answering a 911 call. But aren't you glad they do? For more information, visit AFSCME13.org. We are AFSCME. We make Pennsylvania happy!
Demanding the super rich to pay their fair share for once. The Rick Smith Show.
I got a bad case, I'm turning it up, it's getting cold in here, so fire it up. I got a bad case, I'm turning it up, it's getting cold in here, so somebody fire it up.
Welcome back to the Rick Smith Show. Check out the website, thericksmithshow.com. You know, I listen to Ken, and the reality is the Republicans are masterful at this. Well, we didn't raise your taxes, or we didn't raise taxes. No, didn't do that. But yet you look at, like Ken pointed out, your property tax going through the roof, your school tax going through the roof, the fees for your driver's license, for your car registration, all that stuff keeps going up. Romney was actually the master of that in Massachusetts while he was governor. they had raised fees and licensing requirements like 1,000 times. And that sounds like an exaggeration. It's not. Like 1,000 times they raised things outside of your taxes. They didn't raise your taxes, but they raised everything else. And you go, but what's the difference? And there isn't a difference. They're just using it. It's a nice campaign. I'm never going to raise your taxes, but your kid's college tuition, well, screw you. Because if you remember, and I do, back in 2011, Corbett had talked about a 50% cut in higher education. Half of the higher ed budget he wanted to cut. Think about that for a second. Where does that money come from? And what they were really trying to do, and understand the Republican mindset, understand the conservative mindset when they propose something like that. It's about one of two things. One, we're going to punish those workers. They're going to have to take massive cuts. We're going to make them part-time. We're going to make them adjuncts. We're going to make them desperate. And two, it's about creating a crisis, because they're good at that. And once they've created the crisis, then they go, well, we're broke. We can't do anything but, come on, you know the answer, privatize. And if you realize, of the 14 schools, there's one that's dying to be privatized, and that's Westchester, because it's one of the elite of the state system schools, and they want to be private in the worst way because they're near Philadelphia, and you can charge $40,000-$50,000 a year instead of having a good publicly held university like that. They want to privatize it off. They want to hawk it off because, hey, we're in trouble. We've got a crisis. So we can save those other ones by getting rid of the good stuff, getting rid of the better things. And, it's like anything. If you sell off an asset, you get a one-time infusion of cash. That's it. It's gone. It's done. No more. And then you're screwed. It's like the same argument they're making for the wine and spirit shops. They say, the budget, we're in huge trouble. The way we fix it, one-time bit of cash from selling off a massive asset that is benefiting taxpayers enormously. And that's their answer. So when you think of this crisis thinking, and that's what's frustrating to me, it's always this crisis thinking of how can we screw things up bad enough that people will go, see, government doesn't work. It always amazed me. Doesn't it amaze you that people run for office saying, government doesn't work, and I'm going to make sure it doesn't? I mean, really, I want somebody who goes, you know what? If something's broken, we're going to fix it. Because we believe in the commons. We believe in we the people. We believe in things that we all collectively do for that we can't do on our own. But yet, the folks on the other side of this ideological divide, and there really is an ideological fight going on in this country between the FDR kind of Democrats and the crazy right wing. And look, even Reagan isn't crazy right wing anymore. But that kind of privatizing supply side voodoo economics of if we give the Scott Wagners of the world everything, something will trickle down to their workers and to the rest of us. If we give them all the tax breaks and we give them all the wealth, that somehow they know what to do with it and it will benefit all of us. And the sad reality is if you give them all the money, they do know what to do with it. They enrich themselves. And I think at some point over a 30-plus year experiment of giving the wealth class everything they've wanted, at some point we've got to wake up and go, we tried it, and it didn't work. We tried giving tax cuts to GE, and what'd they do? They laid off thousands of workers at their locomotive plant. We tried giving massive amounts of money to the billionaire class, and what'd they do? They shipped jobs overseas. And I think a perfect example, you go back to 2006, I believe it was, the last time that we said, okay, we know you've been hoarding hundreds of billions of dollars in those offshore tax havens. We know. But you can bring it back now. You can repatriate it. And we'll give you a really low rate. Just please do something positive with it. And they said, oh, okay, because I remember the argument. You're going to bring all this money back and you're going to put it to work and it's going to create jobs. It's going to be great for you working people. And all we have to do is, not get the tax revenue that funds roads, bridges, schools, and all that stuff. I do remember the argument like it was yesterday, because it's the same one they're making today about them hoarding now what is trillions of dollars offshore in these tax havens. But I remember at the time them saying, we're going to do all this stuff. So what happened after the repatriation of those hundreds of billions of dollars at a lower tax rate? Well, what happened was the wealth class of this country divvied it up among themselves by buying their stocks back. Whole bunch of stock buyback programs, which ended up pumping up the stock price, which made the shareholders really happy. And it made them happy. The stocks were up higher. The CEOs are paid based on stock price generally, made their salaries much, much more bloated, made them happy. And then they went to pay for it by laying off, I believe the number was 160,000 jobs that we lost because of that repatriation, instead of the 150 that we were promised would be created. So, you go, wait a second, when do we learn those lessons? When do we stop falling for the tax cut fetish? When do we stop saying, I'm never going to allow someone to raise taxes? And then instead of asking the question, okay, well, who are we going to raise taxes on and what are we going to use it for? That, to me, that should be the question where we're at. And it's my understanding, 2014, education was at the front of our minds, which is why we elected one of the most progressive governors in the country to do just that, get education funding through so our kids have an opportunity. But we've got a recalcitrant Republican General Assembly who's saying, no, we don't care about your kids because we spend enough on them. And if you want to spend more, that's your problem. And oh, by the way, we're going to raise your property taxes and your school taxes along with it. At some point, I hope we wake up. Quick break. Right back.
This is Solidarity News on Radio Labour.
This is a Radio Labour special report recorded on Wednesday, April 27th, 2016. I'm Mark Boulanger. With the result too close to call, electors in the UK are headed to a June 23rd referendum on continued membership in the European Union. Most of the largest unions in the country, plus the National Trades Union Congress, are campaigning in support of staying in the EU. The unions include Unite, the largest union with 1.4 million members, Unison with 1.3 million, and the GMB with about 700,000 members. A smaller union, the National Union of Rail, Maritime and Transport Workers, commonly known as the RMT, with about 80,000 members, has declared its opposition to the European Union and wants Britain out. Proponents of the UK staying in the EU say that many advances in labour law and practices have come from and are guaranteed by the EU. Supporters of what has been dubbed Brexit, Britain's exit, say that the EU has been pushing government austerity programs which have caused much damage. Some right-wing supporters of Brexit have complained about the number of migrant workers entering the UK from other European countries. The governing Conservative government is arguing for Britain to stay in the EU, but some of its prominent members, such as Boris Johnson, the Mayor of London, are calling for an exit. The Trades Union Congress, which represents all the major unions, including the RMT, is firmly in support of the UK remaining in the European Union. Frances O'Grady is the General Secretary of the Trades Union Congress, the TUC. She spoke recently to a convention of the National Union of Students about Britain, the EU, and the June 23rd referendum.
I just want to say a very quick word about Europe, because we are now so close to that referendum on our membership of the EU. Now, the TUC's position is very clear. We believe that a Brexit would pose a real threat to workers' jobs, our livelihoods and our rights. Many of the rights that we take for granted, from equal rights for part-time workers to stronger protection against discrimination and, of course, paid holidays. These have been won because unions banded together across borders, and we won it through the EU, and it's now guaranteed by the EU. Rights that working students rely on and that union agreements build on. Now, I know there are different views about the referendum, and I respect that. And I share the view that the EU is far from perfect, but believe that we can only win change from within. And I will tell you this for nothing, delegates. I won't be taking any lectures from the likes of Boris Johnson about what's best for workers. And I certainly won't stand by and let migrant workers get scapegoated for everything from lousy pay to pressure on public services. Delegates, migrants aren't the enemy. Exploitation is. And if politicians really want to tackle the problems that workers and students face, then it's simple. Stop the cuts and start investing. Get tough on bad bosses and rip off landlords. And instead of kowtowing to big corporations and the banks, stand up for the interests of workers, students and citizens, for a fairer, greener Europe with great jobs and homes at its heart. So when June the 23rd comes, I hope students turn out in force to get your voices heard. Because from student tuition fees to mental health services, the NHS, rights at work, at the heart of all of these debates, it's about values. It's about what kind of society we want to live in, what kind of education can serve everyone, what kind of economy can work for all. There is nothing inevitable about the world that we face now. There is nothing inevitable or natural about inequality. The status quo is not the only option. Another Europe, another world is possible.
Thank you for listening. And remember, it's all about global solidarity.
The proud defender of the American dream, Rick Smith.
Welcome back to The Rick Smith Show. Check out the website, thericksmithshow.com. So today in Philadelphia, a number of groups came together to talk about funding of our public education system. And it just blows my mind that we don't have a rational, sane, reasonable funding formula here in the Commonwealth. It's been explained to me a couple of times, and every time it's a little bit different explanation because nobody really can explain exactly how we fund education here, other than it's a local tax base and maybe a couple of bucks from the state. And I've talked to a number of school board people who've said, look, they used to fund education at 50% in this state. It's down somewhere around 30 now. And again, as we were talking about in the last segment with higher ed, it's about shifting responsibility from the state onto the backs of the local tax base and ultimately less opportunity for our kids, which is why I've asked Jeff Garris to come talk with us. He's the Outreach and Engagement Director for the Pennsylvania Budget and Policy Center. Jeff, thanks for taking time for us.
Sure. Thanks, Rick. Always glad to be here.
So big press conference today, brought a number of groups together, saying, hey, we should be funding education at a reasonable level, right?
Well, yes, we came together kind of with two messages. And, it was a number of organizations that are prominent in education advocacy and education issues. We had Education Law Center, Education Voters of Pennsylvania, Public Citizens for Children and Youth, Public Interest Law Center, and, of course, Pennsylvania Budget and Policy Center were there. And we're all part of this larger campaign for fair education funding that's been going on for 2 years now. And that campaign has really been focused primarily on two things. One, having a rational, understandable, and fair system for funding in terms of a funding formula for school funding from the states to school districts. And then the second thing is to really make sure that we, first of all, restore the funding that was cut from schools 5 years ago as part of the Corbett cuts and make the kind of investments that our children and our classrooms and Pennsylvania's future really deserve. So we were really coming together to draw attention to the fact that there is now a funding formula in place that we think is pretty good. We have some concerns about the lack of focus on restoring fairly the cuts that were made over the last number of years. And of course, a fair funding formula is only as good as the funding that you actually put into it. And so we're calling for significant investment to restore cuts of about $400 million in this next year to go to public education.
Is that possible given the makeup of our General Assembly? Look, earlier in the program, I played a clip of Mike Turzai saying, we spend all of this money. Who's saying we're not funding education?
Well, there are certainly unenlightened minds in the legislature. There's no doubt about that. But this is an important year. This is an election year. There's a presidential election coming up this fall, which brings a lot of folks to the polls. Everyone in the Pennsylvania House of Representatives is up for election, all of those seats, and half of the state Senate. And if you look at any of the public opinion polls again and again and again in Pennsylvania, it's clear citizens, regardless of what party they're in, have said that funding of public schools is a very high priority for them, and that they're really concerned about particularly the dwindling in terms of the overall cost of educating students, the dwindling amount of state funding that's going into this, which of course puts more pressure on local school districts to raise it from things like, most specifically, property taxes.
Or the other side of this, limited opportunities and less chance for our kids to get, things that we got when we were in school that seem to be luxuries at this point, like extracurricular activities. I'll be honest, the only reason I stayed in school in high school was that I was an athlete, and that's what kept me there. Had I not had those extracurriculars, those outlets to make me want to stay, who knows where I would be today. And look, afterwards I went on to get a bachelor's degree and then a master's degree. But if you don't finish high school, your options are very limited.
Yes, and it's not even things that we're talking about in terms of what, perceived, luxury items of, extracurricular things that keep students focused and things that enrich their education. But let folks know there was an article posted in Newsworks online about 3 days ago that really focused on the tremendous disparities that exist between school districts. When there's not adequate state funding, when the way that it's been distributed the last number of years is, totally unpredictable and really not based on real costs, you end up with huge disparities because, school districts that locally can raise enough money and raise the kind of money they want to invest in their students do that. And districts that don't have that capacity to do that end up investing quite a bit less. There's a recent Associated Press story that found that the state's richest 20% of districts spend an average of $4,000 more per student than the poorest 20% of districts. Now let's think about that for a second. $4,000 more per student between the richest 20% and the poorest 20%. If you've got a classroom of 25, and quite honestly, that's a kind of small-sized classroom compared to what folks have had to do to increase class sizes to cover teacher layoffs. But you're talking about a class of 25 students would be $100,000 per year per classroom. Do you think that $100,000 more invested in a classroom makes a difference or not?
Absolutely.
It's interesting, they'll say, you can't just change everything with money. Money isn't everything. In what other part of, our functional world do we say that money doesn't matter? Do we say, it doesn't really matter how much businesses invest in, new technology? No, that's irrelevant. But for some reason, when we come to education, we say, it doesn't matter. Well, it makes a tremendous difference. And the kind of things that we're talking about that are not luxuries, in this particular article from Newsworks, they talked about the William Penn School District, where a classroom has not had a functional heater in the room. And students try to arrive early because the teacher has a certain number of blankets that she can hand out for the students to wrap themselves in while they sit at their desks and try to learn. we're not talking about luxury items. We're talking about basic, fundamental things that should not even be questioned as part of the need for child's education.
And then we've got this high-stakes testing fetish that's going on, and then we wonder why schools like that struggle to perform well on those standardized tests when you're trying to stay warm. Or the woman I talked to, the teacher from Detroit I talked to, said, they got rats running through their room. They've got mold everywhere. When it rains, the rain comes in the classroom. That should not happen in this country, anywhere.
Absolutely. Yeah, it's a tremendous disgrace. And folks who try to, act as though, we're talking about luxuries and we're talking about lots of money being wasted are just, simply not talking about reality. Just today, one of the partner organizations that participated in the press conference, Public Interest Law Center, released a report where they did a right-to-know request about the 2015 impact plans that school districts were asked to submit when the governor was talking about, trying to expand and increase education funding. The Department of Education asked for school districts to say, if you were able to get additional funding, what would you use this for? And so this report that Public Interest Law Center put out today requested through Right to Know what those plans actually were that school districts submitted. Let me tell you, folks should go online and look at these. These plans are sobering. They really take a close look at, what the impact has been of years of underfunding and cuts. What the school districts were saying they would do if they had additional funds was not pull out the stops kind of Cadillac-type programs. I mean, they were talking about basic things like enough funding so that they could continue to have their full-day kindergarten programs going on, which are absolutely essential for the future success of students in school and really a lot of studies show in life. So, the kinds of things that school districts are talking about doing with these funds are just basic things to provide a minimally competent kind of education.
And, the sad reality is too many school districts, too many schools have to deal with that. And, you look at the amount that we spend, and I think you're right, So, I guess the question that I have then is, how do we close this gap then? You said at the beginning that there's a funding formula you think that is going to be helpful. Is that in place? Because I haven't heard that.
Yes, this is the funding formula that's been put in place for the new education funds in the 2015-16 budget.
Okay.
Now, it's a really well thought out funding formula. It's something that a lot of these organizations have been pushing for, but there are a couple of caveats to it. And I should say this is really based on a formula that allocates new additional state funds for education based on the number of students in each district, and it's weighted on student and district factors like the number of students who are low income, English language learners, or newly enrolled in charter schools, and also, what's the capacity of the local school district to provide local funding for it. So this is really an important funding formula and a big step forward. Here's the issue, though. This only applies to new funding coming from the state.
Okay.
And the other thing was part of the battle at the end of the 2015 budget battle between the governor and some of the Republicans in the legislature was really about, whether or not this funding formula that's a fair way of, distributing new funds should be put into place this year or whether this year should be used to restore the funding cuts that were made. Because the cuts that were made under Governor Corbett in 2011 were not done in a kind of uniform or fair way. In fact, what you found was that some districts took much larger hits than others in terms of the state funding that was cut. And in the research the Pennsylvania Budget and Policy Center has done, you can find it on our website, what we found was actually the school districts that took the largest cuts from the state were some of the school districts with the highest rates of poverty among students. Essentially, the school districts that were least capable of, weathering this kind of tremendous cut. Now, it's great to say that for new funds going forward, we're going to distribute them fairly. But if we don't start off by addressing and correcting the unfairness of the cuts, we really are starting off with a number of school districts and school districts like the city of Philadelphia, and even some, very rural school districts that are very poor, we're really not starting off in the best way possible. Unfortunately, that was a tough sell this year in the legislature. And so instead of bringing all the school districts back kind of to where they were, restoring the cuts that were made unfairly, they just simply said, well, that was unfair. Well, probably they didn't even say that. But essentially, they're going to let that unfairness stand. But going forward, we'll be fair in the way that we distribute this. And in the end, what the real challenge is, you need adequate funds in order for fair funding distribution to work effectively. And what we saw with the way choices legislators made was they weren't willing to put in the kind of funding that was needed. And so it really came down to a battle of, we can either, distribute new funds fairly going forward, or we can restore the cuts that were made. And we think there's ways that you could do both. You can restore the cuts that were made and fund schools fairly.
So last question I've got for you. What can we do to move that along? What can we do to push for that?
Well, I'll tell you what, coming up on Monday, May 2nd, the groups that participated in the press conference today and dozens of other groups from across the state are going to be coming to the state capitol. The legislators are coming back now for the first time after the primary on Monday, and folks from the Campaign for Fair Education Funding will be there to greet them and to make clear that, great job, we have a fair funding formula going forward, but we need to have adequate funding going into that formula. And so there will be a rally at the Capitol Rotunda beginning at 12:30 this coming Monday, May 2nd, and we certainly invite anyone and everyone who cares about the future of Pennsylvania, who cares about making sure every child has a chance to succeed, would join us there at the Capitol on Monday.
All right, we'll make sure we get that out so people can show up. What time is it again?
That is 12:30 this coming Monday, May 2nd, in the Capitol Rotunda.
Give you something to do over your lunch hour. There you go. Jeff Garris, I appreciate you taking time for us. Thanks for the insight. Sure. I hope people will show up on Monday, May 2nd, there at the Capitol Rotunda, 12:30, to participate in the big rally.
Great. Thanks so much, Rick.
Thanks for talking. Thanks for tuning in. Jeff, I appreciate the time. Let's take a quick break. Right back. Stick around and listen to The Rick Smith Show.
I've concluded that there are two kinds of people in our world. Those willing to believe there are only two kinds of people, and those who think it's a bit more complex than that. Speaking of questionable enumerations, the list of the 10 worst jobs of 2012 is out, and I seem to have 2 of them. Both newspaper reporter and broadcaster made the list. Okay, I'm not technically a reporter, I'm a columnist, but let's not be picky. These used to be considered quasi-glamorous gigs, but CareerCast, the online compiler of the list, says that the decline in job opportunities and pay in the media world, plus the rise in on-the-job stress, have pushed these down to the 5th and 10th worst career choices out there. It's true that the pay is lower middle class, but there's no heavy lifting, and hey, us commentator types essentially get paid just for running our mouths. Pretty good work if you can get it. Top of the worst list is lumberjack. I can see that. Yes, being outdoors is a plus if the weather's good. But screaming chainsaws and huge trees crashing down would put you on edge every day and maybe in your grave. Dairy farmers rank number 2. It's a noble profession in my view, but most people don't realize that these hard-working and skilled yeomen literally are married to their cows. The lady bovines have to be milked twice a day, including weekends and holidays, no matter the weather or whether you're sick or tired. Other bottom tenors are oil rig workers. Can you say BP? Dishwashers. They get no respect and sorry pay. Butchers. Missing fingers are a routine job hazard there. And waiting tables. Lousy pay and constant abuse from managers and customers alike. This is Jim Hightower saying, however, millions of Americans today can tell you that by far the worst job is looking for one.
Hightower's commentaries are brought to you by the Hightower Lowdown, the monthly newsletter with Hightower's populist take on what the powers that be are up to. Find out more at hightowerlowdown.org.
From United Nations headquarters in New York, this is your World in 2 Minutes. I'm your host, Luke Vargas, for Talk Media News. 10 days after a major earthquake hit Ecuador, the country is still reeling as it attempts to distribute food, get children back to school, and evaluate the safety of thousands of damaged buildings. According to UN estimates, more than 120,000 children have no access to school, and the world body warns that aid supplies risk being mismanaged across a damaged and strained transport grid. The Ecuadorian government says it's got the situation under control, but the cost of rebuilding is likely to present a major challenge. With the low price of oil dampening state revenues, President Rafael Correa is increasing taxes and issuing new bonds to try and raise several $billions. A sign of how bad things are in the country, Correa, a socialist who's long criticized privatization of key industries, is reportedly considering selling off state assets to fund the country's recovery. And more than 60 million people remain affected by the ongoing El Niño weather cycle, the UN said in a report Tuesday. The majority of those affected face malnutrition after the weather phenomena sparked droughts in eastern and southern Africa, Southeast Asia, and Central America. Across southern Africa, 11 countries are considered moderately or highly affected by the driest cropping season in at least 35 years. Even though the current El Niño cycle is expected to end in the next few months, the UN predicts that humanitarian needs won't peak until early next year, after a second weak harvest in a row. The World Food Program predicts that in southern Africa, that harvest could cause the number of people in need of food aid to double, from 30 million to more than 60 million people. For more global news headlines, visit talkmedianews.com.
Welcome back to The Rick Smith Show. Check out the website, thericksmithshow.com. Questions, comments, something on your mind, you can email me, Rick, at thericksmithshow.com. If you missed any of today's program, that's where you go for the podcast. Get the app on your smartphone. Take the program on the go wherever you go. And as always, email me, Rick, at thericksmithshow.com. So I saw this interesting kind of futuristic thing that grabbed my attention. Evidently, there's a group called... what is their name? The number 2 Get There. They've developed a driverless pod that now going to be put into the Singapore transport system, their smart system, and they're going to be able to have these little pods, like little 24-person little pods, driverless, that will feed into their main public transportation system. They say right now it's going to be used mainly for college campuses, for gated communities, semi-controlled environments is what they're saying. And it would act to get people to and from their jobs. It's really a cool video. And you go, is this the future of movement? No, it's not the future. It's the now. They've been doing this stuff since 1997 in Amsterdam, for instance, where they've been running back and forth to the airport since 1997 with these driverless pods. And a number of the business parks in Amsterdam have also been using it to get people from their cars to their buildings. And kind of interesting. I'm not so thrilled because it's going to put people out of work, but it's kind of neat to look at these things move around. And just like, the video that they had were kind of like bugs scurrying all over the place in this well orchestrated kind of a automotive dance, if you will. But the future is coming. I mean, they've got the driverless cars. They've even got driverless bicycles, which, I kind of go, really? But places like Dubai have been doing it for a while. The future is now. Anyway, if you missed any of today's program, thericksmithshow.com, you'll want to check out the podcast. Love to hear your thoughts, questions, comments. You can email me, Rick, at thericksmithshow.com. I'm going to take a quick break. Right back. Stick around. You're listening to The Rick Smith Show. We're working people. Come to talk.
But the powers that be are too great to walk away from the rainbow fade.
You're listening to The Rick Smith Show. For more information, go to thericksmithshow.com. If you've missed any portion of the program, you can download the podcast at thericksmithshow.com.
You're listening to WIN, Workers Independent News, a production of Diversified Media Enterprises. I'm Doug Cunningham. The Warehouse Workers Resource Center says it expects mass firings of hundreds of workers who have been active demanding better wages and working conditions at Cal Cartage. The firings are expected April 30th at the warehouse serving the Port of Los Angeles. Hundreds of workers are facing the mass retaliation for trying to organize and use their labor rights. The Warehouse Workers Resource Center says this is unacceptable, and they believe it's illegal. An online petition has been launched telling the Port of Los Angeles that the firings are unjust and demanding that Cal Cartage retain all the workers who are facing termination. About 80 Independent Pilots Association UPS pilots are honoring picket lines in Cologne, Germany for a 24-hour strike of German UPS workers. IPA spokesman Brian Godet.
Anytime there's a legal picket line against UPS and we're in a position to support that other union, we choose to. Cologne is our largest hub in Germany, and the German workers there are fantastic and do a great job of taking care of our pilots. And if they felt they needed to take a day-long strike against UPS, we're not going to cross those lines. We're going to honor those lines.
Godet says about 60 UPS flights will be affected. Ford Motor Company says it will invest $1.6 billion in production plants in Livonia, Michigan, and in Ohio. The investments were in the 4-year contract reached last year with the United Auto Workers. Ford committed to investing $9 billion in the U.S. over the life of the contract as part of the union's collective bargaining effort. UAW Vice President Jimmy Settles says he's thrilled that the UAW was able to secure these investment commitments in the collective bargaining contract. Ford's $9 billion in U.S. investments over 4 years will create an estimated 8,500 American jobs. On International Workers' Day, May 1st, members of the International Longshore and Warehouse Union, Local 10 in San Francisco, will be calling for a national day of mourning for black and brown unarmed victims of police killings. The ILWU was established after the West Coast waterfront strike in 1934, where maritime workers faced police violence. Derek H. Mohammed is Local 10 Secretary-Treasurer.
Police brutality is a big issue that mostly communities of color have had to deal with historically. The current situation with the police brutality in America, there has certainly been an increase. And since we are a union that has historically sided with the marginalized, the underprivileged, we felt it necessary to raise our voices in opposition to what's going on as it relates to police brutality and terror.
Workers Independent News is brought to you with support from union-owned and represented Bank of Labor, member FDIC, equal opportunity lender. Bank of Labor has earned the reputation as a leader in union business lending by understanding the needs of labor unions. Online at bankoflabor.com.
You've been listening to WIN, Workers Independent News. For more information, visit laborradio.org.
Your working class radio experience, where hard work, common sense, and rational thought are a reality. The Rick Smith Show.
Working hard to make a left, rain shed a bomb red. My father son left to carry on, blue denim had his vein. He's a working class man.
Welcome back to The Rick Smith Show. Check out the website, thericksmithshow.com. So tomorrow is Workers' Memorial Day, a day that we remember those who lost their lives on the job. We also remember the families who, the families of those who were tragically and I gotta say needlessly killed simply because they were trying to support their families, trying to support themselves, their communities. And while we want to remember our dead, we must, in the vein of Mother Jones, mourn the dead, but but fight like hell for the living. And that's why I've asked Jessica Martinez. She is the executive director of the National Council for Occupational Safety and Health, National COSH, to come talk with us about the big holiday tomorrow and also what we can do to save thousands of workers across the country. Jessica, thanks for taking time for us.
Thank you, Rick. Thanks so much for this space and this platform to allow us to share a little bit about our work and what Workers' Memorial Week is about.
So tomorrow is National Workers' Memorial Day, where we do remember people who have been killed on the job. And sadly, we still have to have this day. But I think it's important for us to kind of take a moment and focus on it so that maybe we can solve some of the problems that got us there.
Yeah, exactly. So tomorrow is Workers' Memorial Day, and just to give you a little background, I am part of the National Council for Occupational Safety and Health, better known as the COSH Group. We have over 20 COSH groups across the country and several allies across the country who are committed to worker education, mobilization, and advocacy around safer and healthier workplaces. And we have over 90 events currently across the country that are being put together by COSH groups, worker centers, in collaborations, unions, et cetera, and different community groups who are paying tribute to the workers who have unfortunately have lost their lives. But most importantly, it's also a day and a week that we are committed to taking action, to really reflecting upon what the problems are, what the solutions are, how we can prevent those fatalities, and saying enough is enough. We need safer workplaces regardless of background, race, ethnicity, gender group, et cetera. What industry you work with, every worker should have the right to go home safe and healthy to their families. So this week, we also, National COSH, released our national annual report called Preventable Deaths 2016, which marks, again, Workers' Memorial Week, and it's an opportunity for us to highlight some of the data that comes out of the Bureau of Labor Statistics and compiled with the Census of Fatal Occupational Injuries. And I'm sad to report that this year, unfortunately, there have been more worker fatalities in comparison to 2013. So in 2014, there was a reported 4,821 deaths, which is up by 5%. So this, again, is very alarming to us. It's an opportunity to highlight and say, you know, we really need to demand safer workplace. Employers need to be held legally responsible and accountable for providing and prioritizing safe workplaces. Yep. In addition, we need more inspectors in OSHA. OSHA is the federal agency that's essentially responsible for ensuring that workplaces are safe and healthy. But the problem is that there's not enough inspectors. There's about 2,000 inspectors, both federal and state, and 8 million workplaces. So it'll take over 100 years to really inspect every workplace. So we really need to think of solutions that allows us to address these bigger concerns and the lack of oversight at the workplaces. Yeah, you're right. Yeah, I've often said that if I ever wanted to kill somebody, I would just hire them. Yeah, it's pretty bad. Just the limited amount of oversight there is at the workplace, and in particular, some of the most vulnerable populations. We found, based on our report, highlights this that it's the agriculture, construction, mining, and manufacturing are some of the sectors or industries that have reported the higher number of risks and fatalities in the workplace. We have also found that more than a third of all workers who died on the job due to traumatic incidents in 2014 were over 55 years of age. The reason for that, we're not quite clear. The limited information we have doesn't really give us enough info to figure out the trends. But what we do know is that, based on our work on the ground, again, is that there's not enough training, there's not enough worker participatory safety programs out there, and again, not enough employers are taking safety seriously. Right. So, part of our job is put that message out there and make sure that workers know their rights and are empowered to report injuries in the workplace and do not get retaliated for doing so.
Right, and I would argue part of this is, as union density falls and as unions are continually under attack, that voice on the work site, that voice at work being taken away, I would have to think contributes to that.
Correct. You're right on point. That definitely is a contributing factor to that. In addition, something else that you will find, and something that we at National COSH with our network have also been very close to the cause, is organizing around temp workers. Our economy is changing, and unfortunately, there's less and less secure, stable, permanent jobs. There's this shift to more contracted temp jobs, and we also find that these are some of the most vulnerable workers in the country. The number of contracted workers also increased from 2013. So there is a 7% higher rate of temp worker fatalities. We reported 802 temp workers who died just in 2014. So again, that is reflective of the lack of, good, solid American jobs that are shifting now to these temp jobs. Sometimes these permanent temp jobs that are not necessarily, quote unquote, temp. So. Right. And it gets a little tricky because under the, temp jobs, the question that we put out there is essentially who is accountable and who is the employer. We have these laws that protect us and clearly define that the employer is responsible for a safe workplace. But the problem is that in the temp world, you have both a host and employer and the temp agency. And what we're advocating, the COSH network, is both need to be held accountable. Both the host employer and the temp agency have accountability to provide safe workplaces, provide training in the language that workers understand, include them, and also, again, the important factor is that they allow the space for workers to report near misses and injuries at the workplace. So this is all part of a comprehensive plan to ensure, safer workplaces.
Yeah, that makes sense if you're trying to reduce fatalities and injuries and all of that. But I would argue that the incentives to do that is because, look, we don't lock CEOs up. I mean, we learned that with Don Blankenship in West Virginia not going to jail for the deaths of those miners who were killed because, hey, got to run the coal. We don't see CEOs going to prison. We don't see massive debilitating fines. So, a death here and there, hey, it's just a cost of doing business, Jessica.
Right. Well, and we recognize that, and thank you for bringing that up, because we know people like Don Blankenship, essentially, they're not the exception. We're not saying, our position is not that every employer is bad. We have your good employers who, have the best will to provide safe workplaces with the resources that they have, and sometimes those employers are the small business employers that essentially have good programs, but you have these bigger corporate workplaces, employers that you would think have sophisticated programs, but the truth is that they prioritize profits over the safety of workers. And in those cases where they are completely disregarding health and safety programs, there is fatalities. We are pushing for criminal prosecutions. Don Blankenship, a year of prison is not enough. I mean, it is a step forward. It was a high-profile case, but again, 1 year in prison, we're saying is not enough.
It's not enough. And I've often said, until we start locking people up and for real time, it's not going to change. A couple of dollars here or there that they get to write off on their taxes, that doesn't affect them. But you start locking the CEO up, and I guarantee you'll see a different direction in a mighty big hurry.
Correct. Yeah, that is the case. And in addition to that, OSHA recently did increase fines for workplace hazards at the workplace. However, they're still not sufficient, and they're not a big impact on these mega $1-million corporations that, again, can translate into pennies for them when they're cited for a workplace hazard. So we really need a heavier hand in regulating health and safety programs for workers.
So let me ask you this, because we know that people who get killed on the job today, it just happened. It's a horrible tragedy. It's an accident, whatever. That gets reported, and it makes some headlines and makes people go, oh, we got to work on safety. The other part of it are the diseases and the things that don't kill you immediately but are going to kill you anyway. You look at silica dust, you look at chemical exposure, you look at a lot of this stuff that we don't really even see in the headlines. And I understand you guys have said that if we just took some rational approaches, we might be able to save upwards of 100,000 people a year.
Right. And that is, again, the numbers that I spoke about earlier are fatalities due to traumatic events, right? So like sudden deaths. But there is, these long-term exposures to severe hazards that go unaccounted for many times, and there's very limited data. Researchers estimate over 95,000 deaths from long-term illnesses occur, which is much higher than previous estimates. And then tens of thousands of deaths each year in the U.S. due to long-term illness, which is way too many. Actually, Juka Takala, president of the International Commission on Occupational Health, and the lead author, researcher in 2014, she stated that cancers caused by work can be prevented by reducing or eliminating the exposures leading to the disease itself. So there are prevention measures, and there are countless cases. Again, these are just the reported cases. There must be thousands of other cases out there unreported for several fears: fear of retaliation due to getting fired, or immigration status, which is a big reality for immigrant worker populations. So reporting is also a big challenge for workers when there's a fear of retaliation.
And, the sad reality is this comes back to what we were talking about a minute ago with OSHA being so badly understaffed and, taking 111 years to get to every workplace, which to me is unconscionable. And it's one of those things that sets up an environment where, hey, if you're driving down the highway and you know that there's not a cop on the road, do you think you're going to go over the speed limit? Do you think you're going to cheat a little bit? Absolutely. And I think it sends the same message to employers that they're not going to come around for maybe 100 years unless something horrible happens. That sends the wrong message.
It does send the wrong message. And also, it also highlights the priorities, unfortunately, of our country, which is, the budget for occupational health and safety, OSHA agency, NIOSH, all these agencies that pretty much do the research and the enforcement around worker health and safety is such a minute, small budget in comparison to like Homeland Security that gets billions of dollars for war, putting up borders, etc. But we get such a small amount of money for OSHA, and this is precisely why this is, a war against our own workers. Fatalities at the workplace. There's not enough protections, unfortunately. So it also, I think, brings to light the limited resources put into some of our important agencies that are doing, good work out there.
So if it's a war on workers, what do we as workers have to do to make sure that we win this war?
Right. And that's an excellent question. I'm very proud to be part of the COSH network. I want to just highlight that, our network is a network of advocates and organizers on the ground working with workers face to face, doing education on the corners. One of our biggest tools or just platforms to really empower workers and shift the power to the workers is education. We do very much participatory training. We mobilize around health and safety. Again, Workers' Memorial Week, it is a time for reflection, but we're also very clear that it's a call to action. And we do that constantly. So I do encourage your listeners to become more familiar with the COSH network. We have over 20 COSH groups across the country. If there's not one in your location, we have explored starting health and safety worker committees in different spaces, but we also have a series of allies that are representative of worker centers, labor unions, and other community organizations. So this is, again, a way for us to take control of the situation, demand that we have safer workplaces. And it is a human right. That is very important to us, that we believe strongly that health and safety at the workplace is a human right.
And it affects all of us, not just the workers. It affects the families, the communities, everything, which is why I am a big supporter of the work that you guys do. If you want more information on the National Council for Occupational Safety and Health, KOSHnetwork.org is the website. We'll get a link at thericksmithshow.com. Just click on Jessica's name. Take you right there. Jessica, I appreciate you taking time for us. Thanks so much. And please come back anytime, not just the day before Workers' Memorial Day.
Thank you so much again for your time and for this space.
All right. Thanks so much, Jessica Martinez, Executive Director of the National Council for Occupational Safety and Health, KOSHnetwork.org, the website. Quick break, right back. Stick around. You're listening to The Rick Smith Show, where working people come to talk. I'm Rick Smith, and this is Labor History in 2. You have probably heard about the Red Scare, when thousands of people lost their jobs in the 1950s for allegedly harboring communist sympathies. But have you ever heard of the Lavender Scare that happened during those same years? Thousands of LGBT people lost their jobs due to discrimination. And on this day in labor history, the year was 1953. President Dwight David Eisenhower issued Executive Order 10450. The order declared that federal employees at all levels of government needed to be reliable, trustworthy, of good conduct and character, and of complete and unswerving loyalty to the United States. Later, the order listed reasons federal employees could be fired, including any criminal, infamous, dishonest, immoral, or notoriously disgraceful conduct, habitual use of intoxicants to excess, drug addiction, sexual perversion. That last item was widely understood as a euphemism for gay or lesbian activity. Major newspapers of the day often used the word perversion to refer to homosexuality. The argument was made that homosexual people were a potential threat to national security because foreign agents could blackmail them for information by threatening to reveal their sexual preferences. More than 1,400 federal employees lost their jobs within the first 4 months after President Eisenhower signed the executive order. This anti-homosexual discrimination extended beyond the federal government. Industries that relied on government contracts took the order as a cue to conduct similar purges. In 1957, World War II veteran and astronomer Dr. Frank Kameny was fired from the Army Map Service for being gay. After his firing, Dr. Kameny dedicated his life to leading the fight to end LGBT discrimination. Labor History in 2 brought to you by the Illinois Labor History Society and The Rick Smith Show. For more information, go to laborhistoryin2.com, like us on Facebook, and follow us on the Twitters at Labor History in 2.
This is the Media Matters Minute. I'm Coleman Lowndes. During a segment on Fox's The O'Reilly Factor, host Bill O'Reilly and Fox host Eric Bolling discussed drug incarceration rates. Listen to their conversation.
Oh, I think you have to go hard on drug dealers, distributors.
Even the punks in the street?
Even the punks in the street. I don't think it has anything to do with race. It has to do with what they're doing. They're providing access for kids, people, to hurt themselves.
And why does the left see it differently? And it's trying to diminish the harmfulness of their actions.
Well, Russell Simmons tried to make it about race. He said more blacks are incarcerated than whites, therefore it must be racist.
But that's a big issue.
Yeah, because maybe the more blacks are committing more of the same crimes.
But the truth is, O'Reilly is wrong. In fact, he has a history of campaigning against drug sentencing reform, despite the evidence that current laws target minorities. In 2014, the Washington Post reported that while whites and blacks use drugs at about the same rate, and whites are more likely to sell, blacks are, quote, far more likely to be arrested for sale and possession. For more on this and other stories, please visit MediaMatters.org.
Chances are, when you took a shower this morning, an AFSCME member made sure that water was clean. When you drove to work, an AFSCME member maintained the road. When you rode an elevator, an AFSCME member inspected it. I'm David Philman, Executive Director of AFSCME Council 13, the American Federation of State, County, and Municipal Employees. AFSCME members enforce regulations, keep prisoners behind bars, take care of patients, protect the environment, and more. The work isn't glamorous, the salaries aren't high, but AFSCME members serve the public in every aspect of our daily lives. Chances are, you'll never see that AFSCME member working in a sewage plant, diving underwater to repair a bridge, or answering a 911 call. But aren't you glad they do? For more information, visit AFSCME13.org. We are AFSCME. We
Waving the flag of freedom for people, not corporations. Rick Smith.
Welcome back to the Rick Smith Show. Check out the website, thericksmithshow.com. So today, one of those days where you go, it's about time. Evidently, the AFL-CIO and the BCTGM have announced that they're going to be boycotting Oreos made out of the country. The idea is, look, and I've been doing this for a long time, but, you're going to have to look at your Oreos now. And I'm of the mindset, maybe we stop looking at Oreos altogether for a while. Until this Mondelez comes to its senses. I am not against a company going to another place to make a product. I'm not. As long as it's for domestic consumption. I'm a big fan of domestic production, domestic consumption. You make it here, we buy it here, we consume it here, and you trade things that each other can't make. So when Hershey said, hey, we're going to go to Mexico, I'm going, go. Okay, good. Is it going to be for the Mexican market? Well, no. We're going to try, but we'll bring the excess back here. And you go, no, I'm not going to do that. Which is why every bag of Hershey, anything I touch, I flip over and I go, okay, where is it made? It says made in the U.S. I happily purchase it. I will do the same with, and I guess I do the same in a lot of places. On just about any product, I look for something made in the U.S. Because here's the thing. Those are jobs here. Those are people like you, like me. There could be my job I could be saving. I have a friend who spent years and years working for Hershey's. And, he led a very decent life because of it. Had a good retirement, had all of that stuff because we purchased those products. And at the end of the day, this hooray for me and screw everybody else mentality is really screwing all of us, even the hooray for me guy. So at some point, we're all in this together. So I look at the headline today, which was Oreo maker Mondelez's earnings jump on higher volume prices. But you read through the story, and they're doing everything they can do to make it sound like, hey, there's nothing going on with those 600 workers there in Chicago. There's nothing going on there. You look at the reality is their net revenue fell by almost 17%. So it's hurting the bottom line. But here's the thing. When Wall Street heard we're firing workers and we're moving out of the country, stock price went up. In fact, they were analysts had been expecting 39 cents earnings of 39 cents per share, and what they ended up getting was 48 cents per share. But net revenue continued to fall. And it comes back to, as they've pointed out in the article, because they've basically cut their costs, and it's going after the workforce. It's really sticking it to them. And, the sad reality is it's got to come back to us. It's got to come back to us to say, you know what, we're not going to fall for these trade deals. We're not going to allow companies to move overseas and bring their products back without any repercussions. And it's been going on too long. And I've been talking about this for almost 11 years now. Every chance I get. Because at first it was a slow process, one then another. Started with the Vlasic pickles and went to the Huffy bikes and, everything. I go back and I think of all those things that I used as a kid, all those things that I wanted, those toys, the bikes, all of that stuff. They were made here. They weren't made in some Chinese factory. They were made in, you wanted a game that, I think it was Milton Bradley was made out near Chicopee in East Brattleboro. I think it was East Brattleboro, Vermont. And there was one in Massachusetts, right outside of Chicopee, right there near Springfield. You think of the Mattel toys were made near Cincinnati. You think about the bikes that were made in Southern Ohio. You think of all these products that were made here that now not so much. And you go, well, what's the big deal? Well, the big deal is those were jobs that supported families. And the reason I think we're seeing this anger in the electorate, why people are really angry, and you've got to be pretty ticked off to be voting for Trump, to be honest. But why the anger is there is it comes back down to the economy. And this is where during the first Bill Clinton's years, it's the economy, stupid. We need to figure out how we have an economy that works for all. And this is what Bernie Sanders has touched on. And, honestly, it's what Trump has touched on as well. As goofy and as crazy and as outrageous and as, reality TV-ish as he is, the squirrel found the nut. It's about the jobs. A lot can be forgiven when people have decent jobs where they can put food on the table. And I'm telling you, we need to get back to those days. And part of it is what we buy. The power of the consumer to say, you know what, we're going to punish you for leaving this country. We're going to punish you for making that choice. We're going to punish you for not producing here, especially food products. I mean, really? Just amazing to me. And I guess, we'll see. We'll see if people put up with it. Let's take a quick break. Right back. Stick around.
To lobby leaders for involvement. 3,000 people screaming out, where's our government? Lawsuits and arraignments, members under company surveillance. Public divided, either they love us or they hate us. Profit billions off our back, and it's still not enough. They should have took into account that we never give up. We'll be here one day longer. One day longer. The people's voice is stronger. The people's voice is stronger. We work hard for our money, we work hard for respect. Keep fighting for these rights for generations, it's next. One day longer. One day longer. The people's
Your working class radio experience, where hard work, common sense, and rational thought are a reality. The Rick Smith Show.
It's Tuesday, April 26, 2016.
The Soviet version is this. One of the atomic reactors at the Chernobyl atomic power plant near the city of Kiev was damaged, and there is speculation in Moscow that people were injured and may have died.
30 years since the world's worst nuclear accident, new efforts to contain it.
The United States looks forward to formally joining this agreement this year.
Record number of nations signed the Paris Climate Agreement on Earth Day. Plus,
we can make an aeroplane with an unlimited endurance, an aeroplane that can fly forever.
Solar-powered plane goes halfway around the world.
All of those world records and more straight ahead. From BradBlog.com, I'm Brad Friedman.
And I'm Desi Doyen.
Stand by for 6 minutes of independent green news, politics, analysis, and snarky comment.
Coal has diminished as fracking has increased. People need their lights on. People also don't want their bills to go up, and that hurts poor people as well.
Did you ever notice how right-wingers only seem to give a damn about poor people when you take their coal away? This is your Green News Report. Okay, Desi Doyen, a lot of big world record news in today's Green News Report, it sounds like.
Yep, it certainly is. First up, this week marks the 30th anniversary of the Chernobyl nuclear disaster, the worst nuclear disaster in world history.
Which one is the best nuclear disaster?
On April 26, 1986, human error plus a flawed reactor design led to an explosion and a nuclear core meltdown at the nuclear power plant in Chernobyl, Ukraine. Officially, 31 people died from radiation poisoning. In the depths of the Cold War between the U.S. and the Soviet Union,
Radio of, for, and by we the working people. The Rick Smith Show.
This is the Media Matters Minute. I'm Coleman Lowndes. During a segment on Fox's The O'Reilly Factor, host Bill O'Reilly and Fox host Eric Bolling discussed drug incarceration rates. Listen to their conversation.
Oh, I think you have to go hard on drug dealers, distributors.
Even the punks in the street?
Even the punks in the street. I don't think it has anything to do with race. It has to do with what they're doing. They're providing access for kids, people, to hurt themselves.
And why does the left see it differently and is trying to diminish the harmfulness of their actions.
Well, Russell Simmons tried to make it about race. He said more blacks are incarcerated than whites, therefore it must be
that's
racist.
a big issue.
Yeah, because maybe the more blacks are committing more of the same crimes.
But the truth is, O'Reilly is wrong. In fact, he has a history of campaigning against drug sentencing reform, despite the evidence that current laws target minorities. In 2014, the Washington Post reported that while whites and blacks use drugs at about the same rate, and whites are more likely to sell, blacks are, quote, far more likely to be arrested for sale and possession. For more on this and other stories, please visit MediaMatters.org.
The most important issues of the day. This is The Rick Smith Show.
Well, here it is, our quote of the day. Ted Cruz, yes, Ted said after a great deal of consideration and prayer, he says, I have come to the conclusion that if I am nominated to be president of the United States, that I will run on a ticket with my vice presidential nominee, Carly Fiorina. And I'm going, wait a second, has he won anything yet? Is he even close? Is it possible that he could be the guy? Or is this just ludicrous and ridiculous? This is, in my view, years of participatory trophies, and you showed up, so we're going to give you an award. That's got to be what this is. Anyway, here to talk about the news, what's going on around the world and in Washington, D.C., Bob Ney, Talk Media News Service. Bob, thanks for taking time for us.
Hi, Rick. I have a quote on this new warmth and fuzzy ticket.
Hit me.
Yeah. I think that Carly Fiorina is like a fireplace poker, minus the occasional warmth. A very good Democratic friend of mine reposted that. He made that up, and I have just loved it. I have loved that quote. He's had it about a year now. Look, this is even getting more bizarre. Here's a bottom line. If Ted Cruz does not win Indiana, Ted Cruz does not exist anymore. I don't care what he says,
right,
or pathways, or Donald's a loser, or Donald, whatever he wants to say. He's finished. So what he has done is screwed his entire election, if there were an election, because you pick a vice president, really, Rick, as you know, who you think is, not going to cause you any trouble and might bring you a state or enhances the ticket.
Yep.
A female, a male, a Latino, African-American, whatever, okay? Somebody that can do a decent job. What he has done is, in desperation to win one state, Indiana, so he doesn't end his career, he's picked her somehow thinking this is the boost that's going to make him win Indiana. And he's not.
No, of course he's not. And I got to be honest, there's part of me when I heard there was going to be a big announcement this morning, I'm going, maybe he's dropping out, or maybe he found UFOs. I don't know. But when someone said to me, well, he's going to pick a vice president, I'm going, who'd be dumb enough to stand on the stage with him and go, yeah, I'm going to jump onto this sinking ship?
Well, you know where she's coming from, though, I think.
Where's that?
This is personal. Look,
Okay.
Donald Trump did something,
Yeah.
He made a comment about a woman's face,
Yes.
her face, all right? A bad comment about her face. So she's thinking in her mind, I think, that, look, let's say this works. Let's say that, Trump stumbles, Ted wins Indiana, denies him, the nomination going in, and, one thing leads to another. So what has she got to lose? Because she will turn around and say to Donald, look at this face now, dear. I mean, this is about trying to get some type of revenge.
Yeah. Well, I hope
she might actually be helping him, because if you look at her track record of
exactly
taking $25 billion and throwing it away at the company she was fired from.
Yeah, no, I mean, there's nothing good there. I mean, and at the end of it, it shows that desperation, and really, to me, it's almost unprecedented to have someone who hasn't won anything in a very long time then take a position of, well, I'm now the. It's bizarre to me.
Oh, I think it is. But again, he's got to do something, and Kasich's just waiting for everybody's plane to go down, so he's the nominee.
Right.
And on the other side, just like you and I have talked for months, I've watched these pundits. They ought to listen to your show. Bernie's not going to quit.
Of course not.
Now, they can pundit all day long, which they did. They speculate he's having a meeting with his wife. His wife, did you see his wife on television, what happened by chance?
I did not.
She's on TV. I think it was NBC. And all of a sudden they say, oh, excuse me, Mrs. Sanders, there's an announcement from, I don't know, the New York Times or something, or from NBC, whatever it was. There's an announcement that, you're contemplating, you and Bernie, of discussing whether you're going to continue on. She's sitting at television, and she looks and says, no, we're not. She said, how many times do we have to say this?
Yeah.
So, yeah, I mean, Bernie is he has a cause, and he is not going to let Hillary Clinton go to the center.
Absolutely not. And I did a couple of shows last night where they were saying the same thing. Isn't it time for Bernie to get out? And I'm going, no. It's not time for Bernie to get out because, look, he's moved Hillary in enormous ways. And I actually had one host tell me, no, she was there to begin with. I'm going, really? On the Trans-Pacific Partnership Free Trade Agreement? She was against that from the beginning? Really? Are you going to go there? She was in favor of $15 an hour minimum wage? Really? And,
I think the biggest favor that Bernie can do is to stay in this because, I know there's issues, campaign finance reform. Frankly, they all take money. Not Bernie, but, they have PACs, and, Hillary's not going to change on that. But possibly Bernie Sanders can do a favor to working people if he can just get her to sign in blood of what she will do on fair wages, equality wages, as I call it, a working wage, but also, most importantly, stop these idiotic trade deals.
Absolutely.
Now, if he can achieve that, he will give a gift to a lot of people in this country.
Absolutely. I've been saying keep banging that inequality drum and keep poking at the free trade stuff and keep and the question that I have is, look, there's almost no chance at this point of him getting the nomination. You stay there, you pivot to what you build afterwards, because now the pivot is building that infrastructure to, sure, she can make promises, she's not going to do it. And look, I remember in 2008, I sat 20 feet from Barack Obama as the candidate saying, you can trust me, I'm not going to pass Colombia or Chorus or Panama. And what did he do? Exactly that. He said, you trust me, I'll pass the Employee Free Choice Act. Good luck on that. Didn't happen either. So what I think Bernie needs to do, and you can correct me if you think I'm wrong, but he needs to start building that groundswell of people who are going to keep her and hold her accountable once she takes office.
Well, yes, and in fact, and I just said this on a show today in New York, people have to understand something. And I had an argument with a very good friend of mine who's a Democratic consultant for years, all right, Rick? He and I talked yesterday. He kept telling me, Bob, people will not, Bernie Sanders people, because he doesn't like Bernie Sanders people will not let Trump become president of the United States. And I argue to him that unless Hillary Clinton clearly holds to a commitment, there's about a third of Bernie Sanders people that really don't care if Hillary's elected or not.
No, and I think that guy needs to wake up and realize who Bernie's talking to. He's talking to people who have not been involved in. Our office is in a place where they bring in people from the different campaigns, and we got to meet a lot of the grassroots activist people, and they're all saying, "Hey, this is the first thing I've been involved in."
And see, you have a different dynamic on the Democratic side. Because on the Republican side, there is nobody on the Republican side that will keep anyone intact on a philosophy. There's no one. There is not that dynamic taking place. But on the Democratic side, because of a lot of factors, including a Clinton running, and Bernie Sanders' amazing ability to garnish the fascination of millions of people, you have a dynamic there. Of a policy debate. On the Republican side, there's no policy debate. It's about who can win. It's not a policy debate.
Right. And at the end of it, what's interesting to me is you got one of the Koch brothers coming out saying Hillary would probably be the better candidate, and immediately she's saying, no, we don't want your money.
Well, the Koch brothers, I was saying today, telling a couple of friends, the Koch brothers don't know who to buy each other for Christmas. It's a dilemma.
That's tough when there isn't a suitable politician to be bought.
Can you imagine what type of society we're in when the Koch brothers say, oh, there's no one we want to buy? It's amazing.
But here's the thing. Trust me, they're buying a bunch. They're just going down ticket. And they're building here in Pennsylvania. They're looking at school board races.
You're right.
I mean, that's the scary thing to me is that they're no longer just interested in the national stuff. They want to get to my local school board. It's just nuts. Well, what else is going on? I understand Denny Hastert was sentenced to 15 months in jail for his hush money.
Yes, he. Outrageous details are coming out, and I served with Hastert. Now, I did post today, and this isn't. I swear to you, this is not a sour grapes thing with me because I think some people are taking it that way. But I put a quote out today. And the quote, ironically, was his quote, Bob Ney must be punished for the criminal actions he has acknowledged. He said in the statement, he betrayed his oath of office and violated the trust of those he represented in the House. There is no place for him in this Congress.
Wow.
And that was Hastert's quote on me. And, of course, I said on Facebook, do you still like that punishment philosophy, Denny, for yourself? And I'm past things, believe me, in my life, but I just find it ironic that the guy that made that quote on many people that they should get justice is sitting there and they're asking because he's ill not to have justice. State and federal prison have places for people that are ill. They can take care of him there.
Oh, I'm all in favor. Lock him up. Let me ask you this, though.
Time for this. It was outrageous.
Absolutely. But, here's the thing. When I went to high school, there was a guy who everybody knew was fiddling around with the kids. And in fact, my mother had told me about this guy when she went to the school back in the 60s. So everyone knew that he was doing this kind of stuff. And it took one kid a couple years later to actually come out and say, and when this kid came forward, the floodgates opened and hundreds came out of the woodwork because everybody knew. You knew Hastert. Did anybody know, that he would have this kind of proclivity? Did anyone know that this was the kind of guy he was?
No, but I did write in my book, Sideswipe, Rick, in 2013. I wrote about his staff, and now I think some things are coming to light in my mind. There was a huffing incident where a page was huffing aerosol paint, right? And I actually let it leak because the Speaker's office did not want publicity on it, but I felt it needed to be known. And the parents needed to be called, so it leaked. They got furious with me, called me in, Ted Vandermeet, his staffer, Hastert staffer, and he said, you no longer have jurisdiction over the pages. I was actually the one that had jurisdiction over the pages. And they took it away from me and told me that I could have no jurisdiction over the pages. Now, after that, the Foley sex scandal occurred, and sure enough, Boehner went to Hastert, and Hastert denies that Boehner ever came to him. The Speaker's people covered that up. Now, I believe now, after knowing what I know, and I never dreamed it at the time with Hastert, but knowing the two staff members involved, one was Ted Vandermeet, his counsel, who in a report, which has never been talked about, was told to quit inviting pages to his house for lunch. Wow. He was told, because he was doing that, and they felt it was improper. Now, Ted Vandermeet's the one that covered all this up. So in my mind, I'm thinking Ted must have known about Hastert, and they were afraid if they dug too deep into this page scandal, not that Hastert was with the pages, but stuff would be revealed about Hastert by people who knew about him, with the page scandal, like Foley at the time, Congressman Foley. So I think there was something there now, Rick.
Yeah, laying that out, it does. When I was in high school, one of the jokes used to be with, why don't congressmen like bookmarks? Because they like their pages bent over.
Oh, wow.
You see these.
I had indicated to them at the time too. I did not believe we should have pages under 18 years old anyway.
No.
We had 15 and 16-year-old pages. I thought it was ridiculous.
That's just asking for trouble.
I think.
Yeah, it's just nuts.
For a wide variety of reasons, even beyond the sexual, just the emotional level and, legal age, etc.
I think I hope he gets what he deserved, and I hope that that's right. I hope he gets what he deserved. I mean, I can go much further with that, but I'm not going to.
Yeah,
and finally, I guess the Donald has given a foreign policy speech. Really?
Well, now I watched every second of it, and of course, in my mind, I know if he was on the teleprompter, it would have been a different speech. I understand that. Number one. Number two, I also understand if he was asked a series of questions after it, it would have been a little bit different reporting, all right?
Right.
But he went in, read a teleprompter speech, and basically they took everything he's talked about and kind of put words around it, right, into a pattern. It was fascinating to see him go to the left of Hillary Clinton on Iraq, but the tone of the speech was definitely, everything that's happened that's bad and how weak we are is Obama, Clinton. It's the dual fault because she was Secretary of State.
Right.
And so it was a showman's thing, Rick. I mean, he did get some okay reviews off of this. I just find it amazing. I mean, he read it off of a teleprompter, but he's got good reviews off of it. So he actually achieved somewhat. It's not like he debated Hillary Clinton on public policy,
right,
foreign affairs, but he did achieve something by, he was the different Trump. He wasn't the regular Trump today.
No, he was presidential.
Presidential Trump.
Oh,
he will be regular Trump tonight.
Please don't say. I still don't want to put presidential and Trump together yet. Please don't make me do that.
Well, I warn all of my friends who have said to me, "Clown car, Bob, clown car," and I warn them. Sometimes the clown car can run you over too.
Yeah, 1980.
Yes, sir.
Keep going back to then, Bob. I appreciate the time, man.
Yes, sir. You take care.
Have a good one. Bob Ney,
Thanks.
Talk Media News Service. Quick break. Right back. Stick around. You're listening to The Rick Smith Show.
Radio of, for, and by we the working people. The Rick Smith Show.
I've concluded that there are two kinds of people in our world. Those willing to believe there are only two kinds of people, and those who think it's a bit more complex than that. Speaking of questionable enumerations, the list of the 10 worst jobs of 2012 is out, and I seem to have 2 of them. Both newspaper reporter and broadcaster made the list. Okay, I'm not technically a reporter, I'm a columnist, but let's not be picky. These used to be considered quasi-glamorous gigs, but CareerCast, the online compiler of the list, says that the decline in job opportunities and pay in the media world, plus the rise in on-the-job stress, have pushed these down to the 5th and 10th worst career choices out there. It's true that the pay is lower middle class, but there's no heavy lifting, and hey, us commentator types essentially get paid just for running our mouths. Pretty good work if you can get it. Top of the worst list is lumberjack. I can see that. Yes, being outdoors is a plus if the weather's good. But screaming chainsaws and huge trees crashing down would put you on edge every day, and maybe in your grave. Dairy farmers rank number 2. It's a noble profession in my view, but most people don't realize that these hard-working and skilled yeomen literally are married to their cows. The lady bovines have to be milked twice a day, including weekends and holidays, no matter the weather or whether you're sick or tired. Other bottom tenors are oil rig workers. Can you say BP? Dishwashers. They get no respect and sorry pay. Butchers. Missing fingers are a routine job hazard there. And waiting tables. Lousy pay and constant abuse from managers and customers alike. This is Jim Hightower saying, however, millions of Americans today can tell you that by far the worst job is looking for one.
Hightower's commentaries are brought to you by the Hightower Lowdown, the monthly newsletter with Hightower's populist take on what the powers that be are up to. Find out more at hightowerlowdown.org.
From United Nations headquarters in New York, this is your World in 2 Minutes. I'm your host, Luke Vargas, for Talk Media News. 10 days after a major earthquake hit Ecuador, the country is still reeling as it attempts to distribute food, get children back to school, and evaluate the safety of thousands of damaged buildings. According to UN estimates, more than 120,000 children have no access to school, and the World Body warns that aid supplies risk being mismanaged across a damaged and strained transport grid. The Ecuadorian government says it's got the situation under control, but the cost of rebuilding is likely to present a major challenge. With the low price of oil dampening state revenues, President Rafael Correa is increasing taxes and issuing new bonds to try and raise several $billions. A sign of how bad things are in the country, Correa, a socialist who's long criticized privatization of key industries, is reportedly considering selling off state assets to fund the country's recovery. And more than 60 million people remain affected by the ongoing El Niño weather cycle, the UN said in a report Tuesday. The majority of those affected face malnutrition after the weather phenomena sparked droughts in eastern and southern Africa, Southeast Asia, and Central America. Across southern Africa, 11 countries are considered moderately or highly affected by the driest cropping season in at least 35 years. Even though the current El Niño cycle is expected to end in the next few months, the UN predicts that humanitarian needs won't peak until early next year, after a second weak harvest in a row. The World Food Program predicts that in southern Africa, that harvest could cause the number of people in need of food aid to double, from 30 million to more than 60 million people. For more global news headlines, visit talkmedianews.com.
Bringing sanity and rational thought back to America. Rick Smith.
I'm going to tell you, sanity. Jeez, oh man. I just saw and thank you, Sue, for sending this to me. I just see this story from Baltimore. You know, as the mayor of Baltimore is holding an event, commemorating the anniversary of the 1-year anniversary of the riot that followed after the funeral of Freddie Gray. Police were involved in another shooting. They shot what I believe is a 13-year-old boy who was holding a replica semi-automatic weapon. It was a BB gun. Here's where the sanity has to come in. Look, I'm anybody who listens knows I am not always on the side of the cops. I'm not always on the side of police, but I do believe that they have a right to go home like anyone else, like any other worker in this country at the end of the day. The mother of this 13-year-old boy saw the kid walk out the door with the BB gun. And I'm sitting going, really? In this day and age? Are you kidding me? I mean, at some point, do we not go, hey, Mom, little sense? A little, some thought between something banging around between the ears? You don't let your 13-year-old go walking down the street with a gun. Really? Just kind of nuts. Now, it's been reported that the mother's been taken into custody for questioning, or she's been taken in for questioning. She's not in custody, so don't get crazy. But they told reporters that she knew the kid had the gun. Jeez, oh man. I mean, just what is? I guess I'll file that one under. Anyone can have a child, but you need a license to get a dog. Just kind of my thought. Wow. More fun with guns, if you will. Liberty University has announced that they're going to allow students with concealed handgun permits to bring their weapons to the dorms. Bring your gun to school day. Yeah, we're building that Christian army. You know what it is. Evidently, the private Christian university is allowing them to keep the guns in safes inside the residence. And you know what I'm thinking is it'll be really fun on those drunken nights. You know, when someone comes stumbling in after a night of doing whatever it is that people at the Christian university do, and maybe they're like this Ohio guy who, I guess the son came home late and he ended up shooting the kid, and then lying to police and saying a stranger shot my kid. Before finally coming around and saying, look, I mistakenly shot my own son. The kid's going to live. He's in the hospital. He'll recover, as will the 13-year-old with the BB gun, by the way. He will recover as well. And I gotta wonder, will somebody please tell your children, don't go walking around with BB guns, especially if you live in a high crime area. I mean, really, please. Oh man. Anyway, if you missed any of today's program, thericksmithshow.com. That's where you go to get the podcast, the Rick Smith Show app on the smartphone. Take the program on the go wherever you go. As always, you can email me, Rick at thericksmithshow.com. We're going to be off the next 2 days as I am traveling back to Cleveland to be with my grandmother. We will be back live on Monday the next couple of days. Going to look back at what we've done in the past years. Thanks for being here. We'll see you Monday.
You've been listening to The Rick Smith Show. Together, we can make America better. Email Rick at thericksmithshow.com or interact with us anytime at thericksmithshow.com. Until next time, this has been The Rick Smith Show, where working people come to talk.
It's color like the tide flood beneath the sway.